Okay.
Yes, sir.
The Subcommittee on Aviation will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I will now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. I regret to be opening my first hearing as chairman of the Subcommittee on Aviation in the wake of two tragic aviation accidents that claimed 74 souls last week here in our nation's capital and in Philadelphia. This past week has been devastating for the aviation community and the traveling public. Our thoughts and prayers remain with the victims and their families and with all who have been affected by the accidents that occurred. I'd like to personally thank all of the first responders and the investigators that continue to bring facts to light in both accidents. Thank you for your continued service and dedication to delivering answers to the victims' families and loved ones. There will be a time and place to review the NTSB's findings and to discuss how best to ensure that the appropriate safeguards are in place to protect against such tragedies from happening again. In the meantime, the Aviation Subcommittee will continue monitoring developments as the investigation unfolds, and we will work to keep members appraised of new information. With that said, I would like to thank our witnesses for appearing today. You all bring unique insights and perspectives to the table, and I look forward to a very robust discussion on the current landscape of counter-UAS technologies in this country. Unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, also known as drones, are extremely popular among the American people, so much so that there are more than 1 million drones registered with the FAA. As this number is expected to grow, it's going to grow significantly in coming years. Drones are increasingly being used by aviation hobbyists, professional photographers, real estate professionals, law enforcement officials. Drone as first responder programs have proven to be a crucial tool for law enforcement officials in their mission to protect and serve their communities in a timely and efficient manner. Additionally, drones have the potential to transform the delivery of essential goods, such as medicines and commercial goods, to our communities. That said, the wide range integration of small drones into our airspace at low altitudes possesses unique challenges. We've got challenges both on the ground and in our nation's airspace. Such challenges were brought to the forefront recently in New Jersey, where over the course of a few short weeks in December, more than 5,000 reported drone sightings were submitted to local, state, and federal authorities. While federal authorities in the Trump administration have made it clear that there were no nefarious drones and that operators were authorized, the fact of the matter is that authorities received 5,000 reports. 5,000 reports, folks, is significant and telling of the fact that the aviation community must better educate the public on lawful drone operations. Make no mistake, the recent events in New Jersey have highlighted the ease with which bad actors could utilize drones with nefarious and malicious intent or conduct illicit drone operations. We must continue to support and foster new aviation technologies. The future of American aviation depends on it. That responsibility includes ensuring the appropriate and safe use of counter-UAS technologies in the nation's airspace by authorized users to make certain that civil aviation safety is not jeopardized. With the increasing rate of drones expected to integrate into our airspace and the potential for their misuse by bad actors, now is the time to establish a properly scaled, well-balanced, and legally sound framework for counter-drone authorities and the corresponding technologies. That is why this committee worked with the Committees on Homeland Security and Judiciary last Congress to produce a comprehensive package to reform and reasonably expand the existing counter-drone authorities granted to the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice. As a former law enforcement official, I was pleased to see that legislation included a counter-UAS mitigation pilot program for state and local law enforcement, marking the first time counter-drone authorities may be delegated to non-federal entities. I was also pleased that we were able to expand upon and improve that pilot program at markup so that more law enforcement agencies were able to protect more sites. While we weren't able to get the bill over the finish line last year, I look forward to working with all the stakeholders and other committees to further improve the bill. I again want to thank our witnesses for their willingness to appear before us today. Your expertise in the use and development of these systems will prove critical to the subcommittee as we continue our efforts to address the threats posed by unauthorized or unlawful UAS operations. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ranking Member Cohen is going to be a little bit late, so I'll take the opening statement slot here for this. But I want to thank Chairman Nels for calling today's hearing on counter-unmanned aircraft systems. First off, I want to say the last week or so has been really heartbreaking and very trying for our country and for the U.S. aviation system and the people who work in it. Both of last week's tragedies, the Potomac mid-air collision and the aeromedical Learjet crash in Philadelphia, are stark reminders of the complexity of the national airspace system and why ensuring aviation safety has to remain our top priority. Before we launch into today's hearing topic, I want to say a few words about the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation of the Potomac mid-air collision. First off, as of Tuesday, all the victims have been recovered, and I think that's an incredible testament to the first responders, the divers on the scene. We're grateful to the NTSB personnel as well, who are actively supporting victims' families through the agency's Family Assistance Program. The NTSB confirmed that recording devices from both aircraft are recovered and in the capable hands of NTSB experts for analysis. And I appreciate every agency that's been involved in this whole of government effort, at all levels of government effort. All the governmental parties involved, including the FAA and the Army, are cooperating and lending the appropriate resources and expertise, and hundreds of government employees are supporting this mission. And so I just want to really thank them first and foremost. They're being challenged in their work. It is challenging work, and I want to thank them very much for that work. As a member of Congress, of course, I have a role in this, but as a citizen who cares deeply for U.S. aviation and for the safety of the traveling public, I'm proud of these public servants and grateful for their duty and their sacrifice. As the investigation continues, I do think it's counterproductive to speculate on the causes of aviation accidents, including these two, and we have to allow the NTSB to complete its work before Congress considers potential legislative responses. That's generally what we've done in the past, and hopefully we can do that in the future. This committee will continue to look to the NTSB for facts on these devastating accidents, and we're prepared to support investigators wherever necessary. But as we await more information, I give my deepest condolences and thoughts to the passengers, the family of the passengers, the crew of both aircraft and their families, all their loved ones, and of course the first responders. Continue to think of them and their work. Now to the hearing at hand. The growing number of drone uses today presents various new opportunities and challenges for the airspace. With these evolving demands on our airspace, we rely on fact-based policies and want to reject speculation to ensure the safety and restore the public's confidence in U.S. aviation. Last December, alleged drone sightings across the country, particularly in the Northeast Corridor, captured the nation's attention. And according to the FAA and federal security partners, more than 5,000 sightings were reported in just a few weeks. Although these sightings were confirmed to be a combination of authorized commercial drone operations, crewed aircraft, and other traditional aerospace users, I recognize the confusion and concern these sightings cause across local communities. Even if not nefarious in intent, misguided drone operations can bring U.S. airports to a standstill, threaten critical infrastructure, and potentially endanger national security. As the chairman noted, an estimated 1.12 million small UAS are forecast to be registered in the U.S. by 2028. And so Congress has to ensure that appropriate federal agencies and other eligible entities have the necessary authorities and resources to address safety and security risks posed by these systems. The FAA's mission is to ensure the safest aerospace system in the world, a task that is exceedingly more complex due to new entrants. Under the 2018 reauthorization, Congress directed the FAA to ensure that technologies to detect and mitigate potential risks by errant or hostile drones do not adversely impact the safe and efficient operation of the NAS, or the National Airspace System. While the industry has made significant improvements in developing their counter-UAS technologies, it's my understanding that preliminary results from the FAA's Airport Safety and Airspace Hazard Mitigation and Enforcement Program, also known as the 383 testing program, has shown that some counter-UAS systems do not always operate as described by the manufacturer, may interfere with FAA and airport radar, and even disrupt local telecommunications. So given those risks, it's critical for the FAA to play a significant role in the testing, approval, and deployment of UAS detection and mitigation systems, and that's why this committee itself has such an important role. So Dr. Cahill, welcome back, and thank you for your continued insights as an expert in this field, and we look forward to your testimony about how these systems operate and the importance of evaluating the systems. And over the years, unlawful and unauthorized drone incursions have suspended airport operations and disrupted flights for thousands of passengers. Many of us do remember the 2023 ground stop at Washington National Airport, the 2018 disruption at Gatwick and near London, both caused by errant drone incursions. So Mr. McLaughlin, I'm interested in learning more about unique challenges that airports like DFW have in dealing with these incursions. I'm going to just skip ahead and want to say to Ms. Ellman, I look forward to hearing about the industry's insights on improving counter-UAS. One last note, Mr. Chair, I just want to note, last Congress, this committee approved a bipartisan tri-committee bill, the Counter-UAS Authority, Security, Safety, and Reauthorization Act, to pave the way for scalable integration of counter-UAS technologies and ensure the safety of the flying public and people on the ground. I'm going to say it again, bipartisan, and 3 committees agreed. It could have been such a shocking event in Congress that it prevented other committees from helping us move it forward, because anytime we get bipartisan and 3 committees to agree, it is a shocking event. But we are working together on this in a bipartisan way to ensure that law enforcement and other entities have reasonable expansions of their authorities and to ensure that counter-UAS technologies can be deployed safely. So I look forward to working with you all, with the House Homeland Security Committee, the Judiciary Committees, to reintroduce and to pass this critical legislation. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Larson. You ready to go? I'll pause. I'd like to take a moment to recognize Representative Mann, who is from Kansas. While it is not normal practice of the subcommittee to allow additional oral opening statements, with the concurrence of the ranking member, thank you. Today we will recognize Mr. Mann for a statement.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Realize this is a little bit atypical for this committee, but it's been an atypical week, as we all know, in the aviation industry. So appreciate you and the ranking member for yielding me just a few moments. I'm one of 4 members of Congress from the great state of Kansas. As you can imagine, Kansas is grieving, continue to grieve. My sense is, you know, when things happen, there are some things that you get over, and there are some things that you just kind of get through. And certainly for those people around the country that lost loved ones, certainly for the Kansas community, very tight-knit community, the aviation community in Kansas, this is something that we will never get over, but we will get through it. And January 29th, when American Airlines 5342 tragically crashed, you know, January 29th is actually Kansas Day, where we celebrate Kansas becoming the 34th state on January 29th of 1861. And in Kansas, our state motto is ad astra per aspera, which in Latin means to the stars in difficulty. And this last week, my wife Audrey and I and millions of Kansans have been praying to the good Lord who made the stars to get us through this difficulty. So there's going to be a lot to uncover in the days ahead, Mr. Chairman, but we need to get to the bottom of what happened and do everything we possibly can do in a bipartisan manner to make sure that never happens again. So thank you for the time, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Tracy, for your remarks. I now recognize Ranking Member Cohen of this subcommittee for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sir, I appreciate your statement. It was very well spoken and heartfelt, and I think all of America shares Kansas's grief. This is an American tragedy. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Nels, for convening this important hearing, and I also want to thank the witnesses for being here to testify. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the tragic aviation accident that occurred last week. I was up last night, and I was looking at a video of the accident that the New York Times created at 3D. And I kept looking at it and thinking, it's not going to happen. They're going to miss it. It's hard to believe that it happened. I mean, it's just tragic. And you think of the people and the pilots and everybody. It's just awful. We need to study those, and we will, and we'll find out what happened and how we can improve our system in D.C. and around the country. Last year, Congress took significant steps in enhancing air safety through the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. This expanded air traffic control, workforce training, improves the runway safety through new detection system, and mandates a 25-hour cockpit voice recorder to help make better investigations possible, because the recorders will be saved for investigators to study. Additionally, the bill directs the FAA to address near misses and runway incursions. We had too many of them last year, and have too many of them for any amount is too many. And we need to invest in resilient airport infrastructure and enhance helicopter safety. These measures are critical and are still in the process of being implemented, but as last week's tragedy reminds us, our work is never finished. Safety must always be our top priority, and as product changes, rules sometimes change. Unfortunately, some have attempted to politicize this tragedy. President Trump immediately speculated the tragic crash at DCA was somehow caused by diversity, equity, and inclusion. Nothing has ever been the cause of DEI. Let me be clear, this is absolutely no evidence that DEI played any role in this accident, and any claims otherwise are baseless, taking away from the real issue that we need to study. Similarly, I want to debunk another recent aviation-related conspiracy theory, the so-called New Jersey drone crisis. Late last year, social media was flooded with claims of mass drone swarms shutting down airports and threatening public safety. I thought Orson Welles had come back. In fact, a full review by the FAA, FBI, and the DHS found no credible security threats. Many of these sightings were misidentified commercial drones, law enforcement operations, and even fixed-wing aircraft mistaken for drones. We must separate fact from fiction so that we can focus on real threats, not viral internet hoaxes, and not run to the cameras to make a statement and demand that Washington do something about it when there was nothing to be done about it. That brings us to today's hearing on counter-unmanned aircraft systems, or drones. Drones are becoming increasingly common presence in our airspace, offering opportunities for innovation, but also presenting risks. Unauthorized, reckless, or malicious drone activity can disrupt airport operations, threaten critical infrastructure, and even pose national security concerns. A great example of responsible drone integration is happening in Memphis International Airport in my district. Under the FAA's Beyond program, the Memphis-Shelby County Airport Authority and FedEx are pioneering the safe use of drones for airport perimeter security, runway inspections, and aircraft parts delivery. This initiative includes beyond visual line of sight operations, enabling drones to operate without a direct line of sight while maintaining strict safety standards. Memphis is proving that drones, when properly managed, can enhance safety and efficiency rather than create new risks and public concern. However, challenges still remain. Over the past decade, we've seen drones interfere with commercial flights, obstruct operations, and even be used for criminal activities. Just last year, a man was arrested for attempting to use a drone to attack a Nashville power grid. These incidents highlight why we must ensure that our laws and regulations keep pace with this technology. Last Congress, the Bipartisan Counter-UAS Authority Security, Safety, and Reauthorization Act sought to renew and reform current legal authorities that provide the DHS and the Department of Justice with critical tools to detect and mitigate credible threats posed by drones. I commend the work done by the three committees of jurisdiction that produced this bipartisan multi-jurisdictional bill, and I'm hopeful for its passage during this Congress. Look forward to today's hearing and hearing from our esteemed panel of witnesses who will help us better understand how we can strengthen defenses against drone threats while maintaining the highest standards of aviation safety. And I look forward to working with Chairman Nels this session. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cohen. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. Briefly, I'll take a moment to explain our lighting system to our witnesses. There are 3 lights in front of you. Obviously, green means go, yellow, you're running out of time, and red, please conclude your remarks. I ask you to consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask you to consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask you to consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks, please, to 5 minutes. Representative Begich of Alaska, the only one, all of Alaska, I'd like to now recognize you to provide a brief introduction for our first witness, Dr. Cahill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cahill, thank you for making the long trip from Alaska to our nation's capital. And welcome back to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We know that you are no stranger to this committee, and I'm grateful that Congress can rely on your expertise and the work of the Alaska Center for Unmanned Aerial Aircraft Systems Integration, or AQUASI, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks to guide us on these important matters. Notably, AQUASI has been on the ground floor since 2014, supporting the federal government's efforts to perform research and development in the unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, space, and has been a leader in the development of solutions that allow us to safely integrate UAS into the national aerospace system. I also want to commend you for your 10 years of leadership at AQUASI. It is an important milestone and essential that Alaska remains a leader in this area with its participation as an FAA test site, member of the Beyond program, and the FAA's Assure program. As a newcomer to Congress, I'm quickly learning that it is unfortunately normal for an agency to have multiple programs that all play a role in the work required to integrate UAS into the NAS. What is clear to me is that we need to rapidly accelerate the harmonization of our laws and regulations to keep up with the pace of technology and the threat that unauthorized or nefarious UAS pose to our national security and homeland defense. I'm glad your testimony shines a light on some of the deficiencies we currently have in the governance framework for countering UAS threats. I appreciate your willingness to speak frankly and directly to the challenges at hand. That is the Alaskan way. And if we can get things done right here in DC, there's no limit to what we can achieve in our great state. I look forward to working with you and my colleagues in this Congress on this important matter. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Begich. With that, Dr. Cahill, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Congressman Begich, and Chairman Niels, Ranking Member Cohen, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and esteemed members of the Subcommittee on Aviation. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. My name is Kathy Cahill, and I am the director of the Alaska Center for Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And as Congressman Begich just pointed out, we are one of the top unmanned aircraft programs in the United States. We work with cutting-edge unmanned aircraft systems and counter-unmanned aircraft systems technologies required to safely integrate unmanned aircraft into the national airspace system. The testimony I'm providing you today, of course, is in my professional, based on my professional experience, but it is in my personal capacity, and it does not represent the views of the University of Alaska. Unmanned aircraft, also known as UAVs, drones, UAS, have tremendous potential to increase aviation safety by doing the dirty, dull, and dangerous missions that put current pilots of manned aircraft at risk. However, as the damaging collision between a small drone and a Super Scooper aircraft over the Palisades fire in California, and the use of UAS in Ukraine and the Middle East by our adversaries shows, UAS can also be used for negative purposes. Therefore, the U.S. needs to lead in the development, testing, and implementation of safe counter-drone technologies that allow the discrimination between unmanned aircraft, authorized unmanned aircraft, unauthorized unmanned aircraft, and manned aircraft, while allowing the safe removal of rogue UAS. Any discussion of counter-unmanned aircraft systems technologies needs to start with the definition of terms. Boring, yes, but important. In Title 49 of the U.S. Code, unmanned aircraft are defined as an aircraft and associated systems that are operated without the possibility of direct human intervention from within or on the aircraft. The key piece of information in that definition is that UAS are aircraft and have the same protections as manned aircraft. Interfering with the flight of an unmanned aircraft violates United States Code Title 18, Aircraft Sabotage Act, or Title 49, Aircraft Piracy. In the same section, counter-UAS technologies is defined as a system or device capable of lawfully and safely disabling, disrupting, or seizing control of a UAS. There are multiple different ways to mitigate or, quote, take down the drone, but they predominantly fall into two categories. One is kinetic. Kinetic solutions such as nets, projectiles, lasers cause direct physical damage to the UAS. Non-kinetic solutions such as hacking, jamming, and spoofing do not directly damage the UAS. The non-kinetic solutions potentially violate several sections of Title 18, including the Pen Trap Statute, the Wiretap Act, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and other statutes designed to protect privacy of U.S. citizens. Therefore, anyone conducting counter-UAS activities must receive relief from those statutes or face arrest. There are also systems capable of doing standalone detecting, tracking, and identifying of an unmanned aircraft. Several of these types of DTI sensors run afoul of Title 18 as well, so the operators of those systems must be granted relief. However, the biggest challenge of doing counter-drone technology is the potential for damage to people and property on the ground and the interference with other aviation safety systems. Due to the physical and privacy risks associated with conducting counter-UAS operations and potential classified nature of the system's responses, the authority for conducting CUAS activities has been limited to 5 agencies: Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and the FAA. The recent New Jersey unknown drone scare highlights the fact that there is not a consensus on who should have counter-UAS authorities. State and local officials and many members of the public wanted state or local entities to be able to, quote, shoot the drones. In my opinion, the risk of unintended consequences from a mitigation attempt by a state or local entity is too high without the appropriate training and coordination. However, I would be comfortable with granting state and local authorities the permission to use the DTI systems. The number of companies able to develop and test the CUAS and some DTI systems is limited because it requires the authority to interfere with an aircraft, even the company's own aircraft. This is driving companies to test their technologies in other countries. The FAA Reauthorization Act of 1924 took the first step towards addressing this problem by including language to allow the 7 test sites to support CUAS testing, but they were not granted the authority to mitigate. We need to be a leader in UAS technology. We cannot afford to fall behind our adversaries in the implementation of this technology. This ends my oral testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Cahill. I now recognize Ms. Ellman. You are recognized 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Great. Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Cohen, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the Subcommittee on Aviation. My name is Lisa Ellman. I am the Executive Director of the Commercial Drone Alliance and a partner at the law firm Hogan Lovells. On behalf of the CDA, we share in expressing our condolences to all those affected by last week's tragic aviation accidents in DC and Philadelphia, and we are grateful to the emergency and support personnel who responded. Our collective safety work must continue in earnest, so I thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts at this important hearing today on counter-drone technologies. Alongside Chris, I also served on the FAA's Counter-Drone Aviation Rulemaking Committee. I am honored to inform your work today on pending counter-drone legislation and to answer any questions you may have. The Commercial Drone Alliance is an independent, nonprofit organization made up of leaders in the commercial drone industry. We work with governments to enable safe, secure commercial drone integration nationwide. We are here today because drone technology has improved greatly over the last decade, providing life-saving, societal, and economic benefits for all Americans. Communities across the country, including in your districts, use this technology to respond to natural disasters, promote public safety, inspect critical infrastructure, and even deliver food, medicine, and household goods. The drone industry is projected to contribute billions of dollars to the economy over the next decade. Yet, all technology can be used for good and for bad. As we have all seen in the news, careless, clueless, and criminal drones may pose public safety and homeland security threats. The commercial drone industry sees innovation and security as 2 sides of the same coin. Our goal is for the public to trust that commercial drones are being operated safely and to understand the significant value this technology brings to the country, while mitigating threats of misuse. We therefore encourage policymakers to take 2 common sense steps. The first is establishing a foundation for safe and secure drone operations. The second is expanding legislative authorities for dealing with non-compliant drones. Together, these steps will enhance transparency and provide authorities with appropriate tools to address potentially nefarious drone operators, while supporting lawful operators and promoting American industry. The good news is that we have existing tools to establish a safe and secure foundation. The FAA's remote identification rule for drones took effect this past year. Similar to cars on the road, virtually all drones are now required to broadcast a digital license plate number accessible to the public with a smartphone app. But more work must be done to improve compliance with the rule and public understanding of how it works. Additionally, there are 2 new FAA rules under development which would improve transparency and security. We expect the first rule, known as Part 108, to enable routine beyond visual line-of-sight drone operations while improving low-altitude airspace awareness. We expect the second rule, known as the 2209 rule, to enable the prohibition of unauthorized drone flights over certain sensitive sites. Unfortunately, despite repeated calls by this committee for action, and despite the best efforts of many at the FAA, congressionally mandated deadlines for both rules have been ignored. We hope that Congress will continue to hold agencies accountable for finishing this critical work. In addition to establishing this foundation, Congress must expand existing counter-drone legislative authorities. Current federal criminal laws, such as those meant to protect landline telephones, actually prevent the use of helpful technology that can increase transparency. We applaud this committee's work, along with the Homeland Security and Judiciary Committees, in drafting H.R. 8610. We thank the committee for engaging with stakeholders to continue to improve this legislation, which would make important changes to today's status quo. We urge both chambers to work together to pass legislation and properly resource federal agencies to enact it as soon as possible. We believe the best version of a final bill should include, first, a way for appropriately trained private sector and law enforcement entities to use advanced detection capabilities. Second, a robust mitigation pilot program limited to flight-restricted areas. And third, streamlined interagency approval processes with accountability mechanisms. Together, let's make 2025 the year of drone innovation, transparency, and security. The opportunity cost of inaction grows as the gap between technology and policy widens. Congress can enable the benefits of drone technology while protecting citizens from rogue actors. The Commercial Drone Alliance appreciates the opportunity to appear before you, and we look forward to continued collaboration to ensure America's global leadership in advanced aviation. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ellman. Mr. McLaughlin, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Cohen, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to this hearing. I'd like to start by echoing my peers and expressing my deepest condolences to the families and loved ones affected by the tragic aircraft accidents last week. These heartbreaking events underscore the critical importance of ensuring the safety of our national airspace. As we focus on the challenges posed by unmanned aircraft systems, we are reminded of the constant vigilance required to keep our skies safe. My name is Chris McLaughlin. I'm the Executive Vice President of Operations for the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the 3rd busiest airport in the world, handling over 80 million passengers annually. I look forward to sharing DFW's perspective on countering unmanned aircraft systems. I'm particularly grateful to testify in today's hearing because aviation and airport security has been my career-long passion. Recently, I had the opportunity to serve on the FAA's UAS Detection and Mitigation Systems Aviation Rulemaking Committee, where I co-chaired a working group on operational requirements for UAS detection and mitigation systems. The ARC's report highlighted that airports face unique challenges with drone threats due to the dynamic nature of airport environments. Unlike other critical infrastructure, airports must manage airspace in real time, ensuring drone operations don't disrupt essential commercial operations, and at the same time, that counter-UAS efforts don't unintentionally jeopardize the same. Airports like DFW manage high volumes of aircraft, and an unauthorized drone in our airspace can introduce catastrophic safety risks to passengers and crew. To be clear, though, DFW is not anti-drone. While unauthorized drone activity presents significant risk, authorized drones can serve invaluable tools for airports by enhancing operational safety, efficiency, and innovations. Their thoughtful integration holds the potential to create a safe and secure environment, offering numerous benefits while addressing risks. This is why ensuring safety while supporting UAS integration in an evolving airspace is vital. At DFW, drone detection has served as a critical first step in addressing UAS presence. We've partnered with TSA on detection since 2017. We've piloted a second system through an FAA-approved process, and we intend to install a permanent solution, again, with FAA approval. Our detection system has been effective, identifying thousands of legitimate flights in our 5-mile radius annually and flagging about 150 that were operated inappropriately. Telling the difference can be difficult because airports lack independent access to FAA data on authorized drones. Better data sharing would enhance airport safety. That said, information is not always enough. In extreme situations, mitigation is important for airports, and right now that authority is limited to certain federal agencies whose physical presence at airports is insufficient. State and local law enforcement agencies with advanced capabilities are better positioned physically to respond to drone incidents near airports. With proper authority, safety-tested technology, advanced training, and strict federal oversight, they could supplement federal efforts, enhancing response times and improving coordination. Similar models for success exist today in aviation and have been effective for decades. At DFW, for example, our police department has a close working relationship with our federal partners who provide training, guidance, and oversight for our K-9 teams and EOD team. Their oversight and training is invaluable, and our officers' ability to respond to incidents relieves an otherwise heavy burden on federal resources. Again, let me be emphatic. When it comes to drones, the federal government is best positioned to lead the detection and mitigation effort. Willing airports can play a broader role, though, and support the federal governments through pilot programs that allow them to acquire and use mitigation systems tailored to their unique circumstances. DFW is committed to working with Congress and our federal partners to develop counter-UAS strategies that meet the needs of all airports. And to that point, we strongly believe that the acquisition and deployment of any UAS detection and mitigation system should remain optional for airports, recognizing each one's uniqueness in terms of size, traffic, financial resources, and their overall impact to the NAS. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm confident that with your leadership and the collaboration of all stakeholders, we can counter UAS threats while supporting the growth of the commercial drone industry. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Thank you all for your testimony. I ask you now to enter into the record a letter from the American Correctional Association on February 3rd, 2025, and a letter from the Association of Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International on February 6, 2025. Without objection, so ordered. We will now turn to questions from the panel. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Ellman. In your written testimony, we talk about, you say in your testimony, despite calls by this committee for action, congressional mandated deadlines have been ignored at the expense of the drone industry and the American public. I think you were referring to the Beyond Visual Line of Sight, as well as a Rule 2009, which has been out there since 2016. Can you explain a little bit why was the FAA ignoring us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Chairman Nels, and thank you. Part 108, which would broadly enable beyond visual line of sight, as well as increase transparency in the airspace, incentivize electronic conspicuity, can go a really long way, has been, under development for several years now. Section 2209 is kind of on the other side of the coin, focusing on security, requires the FAA to establish a process by which private sector entities, fixed site facilities, critical infrastructure facilities are able to prohibit or limit drone operations, unauthorized drone operations over their property. We're broadly in support of these two rules. They should move forward immediately together. We don't exactly know why they've been held up, but we see this as and just to be clear, the FAA has done a lot of good work here. They've been held up at kind of higher levels in the interagency. So we see this as a great opportunity for the Trump administration. These are two rules that are ready to go that can really help here, and we hope to see them move forward right away.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, given your knowledge on counter-UAS systems, how do you view the current process of multi-agency coordination needed in the event that mitigation of an aircraft is required?
Well, so we're grateful for our current relationships with both our federal and our local partners. Being successful at an airport when it comes to safety and security really requires a partnership. I think the single biggest thing in the current construct that could make our response times better would be to give persistent authority to those agencies that currently have the ability to mitigate under certain circumstances, but require individual approval each time they do that. I'm told by people that I know and trust that that could take days to get that approval. We need that approval in minutes, not days.
And we should be able to address that right in this committee. You agree?
I believe so, yes.
You know, I had an opportunity, obviously Dallas, Fort Worth, I'm from Texas. I had an opportunity to go visit an airport in the state of Wisconsin, and they were showing me everything there. DHS was showing me the screens, and I said, okay, so they have the ability to detect a drone. Obviously, they show the airspace, and so they can identify it, they can detect it, but they have no way of getting that drone out of that restricted airspace in a timely and I would say an efficient manner. They just don't have the ability to do it. I said, why in the hell don't you have the ability to do it? I think, Ms. Ellman, you talked about, or maybe it was Ms. Cahill, about these certain agencies that have the ability to do it. Department of Energy, DOD, DHS, DOJ, I think Coast Guard underneath the Department of Homeland Security. I said, well, so these drones can fly into these restricted airplaces over airports, and we have to just say, well, we'll get to it when we can. I found that somewhat shocking, and I think the American public that are flying aircraft around, on these airplanes would be appalled to think that if some bad actor, nefarious activity, and that drone flies into that restricted airspace, that we don't have the ability with mitigation. Yes, we do, Mr. McLaughlin, have the ability to tell air traffic control, divert, fly around, get the hell out of the area. And then so as I continue to research this, and then I'm going to show you a prototype of a device. I don't want to scare anybody here, so please, it's not working. It's not. So does everybody know, and maybe the new members in the committee, does everybody know this thing here? This is about $50,000. And this device here is called a D-Drone Defender. It sends a radio frequency and a GPS jammer. That's what it does. So if a drone is flying into that airport, restricted space, an operator can put the crosshairs on that drone, shoot that radio frequency, and it returns the drone back to where it took off. Now, why in the hell don't we have these at our airports? I was assured by the manufacturer, and there are others, that this will not interfere with airplanes. It won't interfere. It won't have any problem with airplanes taking off and landing. I says, if you want to protect the American people, these things should be deployed at our nation's airports. Now, I like the federal government. What we do is we want to kick the can down the road. We just have more studies. That's what we do in America. Well, let's study this, study that. We've been studying things since 2016 and haven't done a damn thing, right? So I'm done with all the studying, and let's come up with a solution to the problem to address aircraft, drones that are flying in restricted airspace that don't belong there. Because eventually, one day, one of these bad actors will take one of those drones and commit a terrorist attack, and it's going to happen on our airline industry. And we should be better than that. Don't tell me it's about money, because this thing costs about $50,000. How much are lives worth? So the technology is there, folks. The technology is there. You just think that we, as Congress and the FAA, could do better to make sure that we address the issue with drones, because they're by the thousands, if not millions. You're going to see more and more of them. Operators are they don't necessarily understand rules, or they get a little confused every once in a while. But to have these things flying in restricted airspace is going to be a problem, whether it's the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday, or whether it's in airports across our country. With that, I yield back. I now recognize the Ranking Member Cohen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a pretty impressive piece. I think every congressperson should have one of those, too. Mr. McLaughlin, I was in Dallas-Fort Worth last week, and that seems like it's grown even since the last time I was there. It's gigantic.
It's a big airport.
Well run, though. Thank you. You testified that the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport has detected more than 5,000 drones in its airspace annually, and 150 operating inappropriately. Given this reality, what additional tools or authorities do airports like yours need to better respond to unauthorized drone activity besides the?
So to be clear, we've identified about 5,000. That does not mean that's the total universe that's been in our area, because all technology has limitations. And so what airports need first and foremost is the ability to continue planning with our state and local partners through tabletop exercises and response protocols. Right now, our current technology allows us to detect many drones. It allows us to track those, and it allows us then to identify, in some cases, the pilots. Would be really helpful would be better technology to detect, track, and identify the drones, because that helps us classify whether we're dealing with a threat or someone who may be careless or someone who may be clueless.
You say to identify them, I think it was Ms. Ellman said, somebody, that they have license plates, Ms. Cahill, somebody said it, license plates you can detect?
Yes. Do you want to?
Sure. So there's a remote ID rule that went into effect last year, and virtually all drones flying in the national airspace are now required to be broadcasting essentially a digital drone license plate that identifies them in the airspace.
So if they're doing that, what do you need, Mr. McLaughlin?
So not all technology is created equal. We need highly effective technology that allows us to reliably and quickly, again, detect, track, and identify the individuals. Most cases of the 150 that I talked about, in almost every single one of those cases, we can have a casual conversation with law enforcement, either our own or the jurisdiction of record, and that individual understands better what they did wrong, and they won't do it again in the future. In a couple of cases, so of the ones that I've talked about, we have had a couple that truly were criminal in nature. And in those cases, and to the point that Chairman Nels brought up, we would like to have mitigation capability. But I would point out again, and as Dr. Cahill indicated, there are kinetic forms and non-kinetic forms of mitigation, and we believe in the airport environment that non-kinetic mitigation is the safer route, because for us, the safety of aircraft will always be our #1 priority.
You said in your statement, and I might not have interpreted it correctly, and it's entirely, that despite our individual decision, and as a final point, we strongly believe that the acquisition and deployment of any UAS detection and mitigation system should remain optional for airports, recognizing variations in size. And I understand the difference in sizes. What Dallas needs, you might not need in some tiny town. But do you not think there should be some minimal standards, or the federal government should have some type of a requirement that there be some type of system to detect what the drones flying over the airport?
So there's, as you know, over 450 commercial airports in this country. In your all's jurisdictions, there's numbers from very, very small to medium sized to very, very large. And having been in the airport world for a long time, I believe that all airports have very, very different capabilities, and we've got to recognize that. The thing that we think about most in airports is that first and foremost, we want to protect the airspace, and the best way to do that is to deconflict manned aircraft, crewed aircraft that are entering or exiting our airspace. Once those aircraft have been safely removed, then there's a variety of mechanisms that we can use to mitigate the drone. One of them, in a very small airport, could be to wait. In a very large airport that has an impact on the overall NAS, we can't afford to wait, and we've got to take action more quickly.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Ellman, you talked about the New Jersey drone crisis, misinformation. We talked about it in the drone activity test. Quickly it spread. You mentioned the need for public education campaign to distinguish between legal drone and actual security threats. What type of campaign do you think it should include, and who should lead it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much. So this digital drone license plate requirement, the remote ID rule, which I referenced, the intent of it is very laudatory. It's transparency in the airspace. We should know what's flying in the airspace. The commercial drone industry strongly supports the intent of the rule. However, compliance with the rule could be stronger. There needs to be, but also, what we saw, you were referencing the, 5,000 complaints to the federal government about drones flying in New Jersey. When I, as a member of the public, pick up my cell phone to take a grainy cell phone video of something flying in the air, what I really should do first is actually open up an app on my smartphone with a remote identification app to see if I can identify the drone license plate, right? There's a lot of information out there that if a drone operator is following the rules and operating in compliance with the remote identification rule, you can kind of assume that they're at least understanding the FAA rules And you can have access to that license plate. And then if there is an issue with the drone, you can actually refer law enforcement to that drone license plate, just like a car on the road. But because the public doesn't really understand how to receive that information, the Commercial Drone Alliance, and I think there's a role for the federal government here, should embark on a public education campaign to ensure that we're able to use all of the tools that are at our disposal.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cohen. I now recognize Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cahill, you mentioned DTI technologies that are available for identifying, tracking drones. Can you describe that technology in a little more detail for us?
I'd be happy to. So detection, tracking, and identification kind of comes in a multitude of different flavors. You can do something like acoustic, where you basically listen to where the drone is, and you triangulate where it is from a series of sensors. You can do the same thing with looking at the RF emissions of the drone and its operator. So you actually can triangulate where the drone is, and in some cases, you can triangulate where the operator is and send law enforcement to go intercept. There are also cameras, radars, a multitude of other different ways that you can identify that there is something in the airspace and monitor how it is moving. In most of those cases, as long as you don't break into the radio frequencies and read the packets, you can stay clear of Title 18. But if you actually break in and determine who it is, et cetera, outside of that remote ID license plate, then you run afoul of the pen trap, wiretap, et cetera.
Are there any other laws that are getting in the way, or maybe they're not getting in the way, maybe those are good laws, but are there any other laws that impede these technologies to track drones? Ms. Ellman, I'll ask you that question.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, Congressman. It's a great question. There's actually interagency guidance from August of 2020 that literally goes through line by line every single law that could potentially impede the use of counter-drone technologies, both detection and mitigation. We can get you that document. That's the best resource. But everything from laws that are meant to protect against hacking landline telephones or computer fraud and abuse or, sabotaging an aircraft could potentially apply. Various Title 18 and Title 49 provisions.
Mr. McLaughlin, what types of technologies do you use at your airport to detect and track and identify drones?
So right now, as I said, we've been using one technology in conjunction with TSA for about 6 years, and then we piloted another one. These are passive systems that allow us to identify UAS in our airspace and identify the location of the pilot so that we can follow up with them via a conversation.
And I know the air traffic controllers have a very difficult job, and we don't want to distract them from the things that they're tracking right now. How do you integrate those warnings and trackings in the tower with the air traffic controllers? Is this a separate location where they're looking at this information, or how do they coordinate with air traffic control?
Right, so physically it's a separate location, but we're all in close proximity. We're always a phone call away. That's the way that the airport control center and the FAA towers work. We're always in connection. We're governed by an FAA-approved counter-UAS policy that's been in place for several years. And paramount in that policy is active communication when there isn't a threat. So quarterly, we get together with the FAA, with our airlines, with our airport stakeholders. We talk to each other, we compare notes, and we make sure that we always have those communication connections set up and available. In the event of an actual UAS threat, the first thing we do is determine whether that threat is credible, whether that threat is imminent, and whether it's going to affect our actual airspace as opposed to just our property boundaries. And when we think that there's an actual threat, we coordinate directly with the FAA tower. Now, many times we see visual sightings too through the FAA tower. So sometimes that communication comes to us from the FAA when we don't see something detected on our system.
And you mentioned that most of the ones that you've identified and tracked back to the operator haven't resulted in civil or criminal penalties. It's either somebody who doesn't understand that it shouldn't be doing it, they need talked to by law enforcement. But I want to ask all three of you, what are the civil and criminal penalties, Dr. Cahill, for operating in the airspace of an airport?
So in terms of the legal implications, There are a number of different rules in terms of, the violating the airspace. You can be basically you're collecting information illegally in some of these cases in terms of in restricted airspace, et cetera. I would look to Ms. Ellman to give you the best overall view of what all the legal ramifications are. But if you are operating a drone over an airport, you are interfering with the operations of that airport. You are interfering with aircraft ability to operate. And so there are a lot of statutes associated with that particular thing. So it would be a case where you could send law enforcement to that person and charge them.
I'm pretty much out of time, but since she referred to you, Ms. Ellman, can you tell us what penalties are?
Yeah, sure. So
Briefly.
it frankly just depends on kind of what the rule is that's being violated or what the law is that's being violated. You can't operate recklessly. You can't endanger the public. You can't be violating restricted airspace. So I'd be happy to follow up with you on particular criminal penalties that are appropriate for whatever, types of situations you're worried about.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Larson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Dr. Cahill, the 24 FAA authorization bill prohibits the DOT from operating and procuring drones or associated elements or counter-UAS systems manufactured by a covered foreign entity, largely focused on China, I think that's right. However, we provided collectively an exemption for testing and evaluating of UAS detection and mitigation systems. So can you explain the importance of why a research facility like yourself needs to test drones that we have otherwise banned, why it's important for the R&D to get done on this?
Chairman, Ranking Member Larson.
Merely ranking member.
Hey, sorry. It's a long trip from Alaska. In terms of the FAA reauthorization, the reason we need to be able to test covered drones is that is a large portion of the drone market. So if you are talking, for example, a DJI aircraft, that is what most people are going to go pick up at their Costco. And if you don't test the signatures of those particular systems, we can't tune the counter-drone systems to look for them. And so a lot of the cases are you want to test the different aircraft command and control frequencies, you want to hear what its acoustics are, you want to characterize what that aircraft is so that when you encounter those signatures, you can identify what it is. So that exemption to allow the test sites to purchase covered drones in order to do counter-drone testing is very important for testing these systems and ensuring that they will be able to respond to what is commonly seen in the atmosphere.
Yeah, thanks. Are you, some of these questions I have might be, I don't know if you can answer them in public or if you're, if the answers are going to be protected, but what are your thoughts on the use of generally of AI technology and autonomous use of drones, and how do you test against those versus ones being literally controlled by a handheld versus one that's programmed?
So in terms of how we respond to those, with something that has been pre-programmed, it is a little bit more challenging, of course, to find out who the operator is. I mean, this is something where you can set it and forget it. So you could send it off and then you could leave where the area is. So that makes it a little trickier to determine who may potentially be doing the operations. If it is something where it is in constant communication with the operator, then that gives us the opportunity to detect where the operator is and to send law enforcement to go talk to the person, see if they're careless, clueless, or criminal. So there is a difference in how we approach them depending on how they are operating. If they're operating remote ID, it's easy to determine who they are, and that makes it easy. Unfortunately, if I was going to be a bad actor, I would turn off remote ID, I would cover up the lights, and I would make it as quiet as possible and fly in a weird pattern. So in those cases, the technologies are far more challenged in terms of can you determine if it's real or if it's a false alarm. So there are a lot of challenges on that front.
Yeah, thanks. Ms. Ellman, I happen to think that 8610 is the perfect bill. It needs no changes at all. I think we have generally the agreement of two other committees, Judiciary and Homeland Security, as well as ours. I understand the Commercial Journal Alliance has some other views, and we negotiated those differences. But I think for our edification, could you just remind us of some of the changes that you wanted to see that weren't included in last year's version of the bill?
Absolutely, Ranking Member Larson. And first of all, thank you to yourself and your staff and the whole committee for working with us over the last year. The bill is continuing to be improved, and we love to see that. So we appreciate it. We do think that there are some additional improvements that could be made. I'd highlight just 3 in particular. The first is that in the era of remote ID, from our point of view, detection technology is very uncontroversial. So we believe that states and localities should have broad access to detection technology, as well as appropriately trained private sector entities. And so that's one change that we would ask for. The second is we want to ensure the success of the pilot program. And so you need to be able to have as many geographic, diverse, and different types of environments that are included. But we also appreciate the House bill's focus and prioritization of flight-restricted areas. So we would ask for higher numbers, but keep it within flight-restricted areas. And finally, there are interagency processes that are set up through your legislation. The interagency collaboration is, of course, key. We want to ensure that they're not bogged down by red tape and bureaucracy, and that they're safety-focused, and that there are deadlines and accountability mechanisms included in those processes to ensure that the processes move forward and these programs are able to be implemented as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you, and yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Perry, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll begin by just acknowledging the 2 tragic accidents occurring here and in my home state of Pennsylvania, and I think they both underscore how delicate system is, and just offer my prayers and thoughts for the families that grieve the loss of their loved ones at this moment. Our work here is important. Mr. McLaughlin, your testimony highlights, the threats, but also the benefits, and so like much of what we deal with in common society today is a balancing act, right? And so now, as I understand it, Dallas-Fort Worth has developed their own drone detection system. Can you kind of talk us through the approval process with the FAA and what we might be able to do here on this committee to assist other airports? And then I have some other questions, but just what's that approval process like?
Yes, sir. And to be clear, we haven't developed our own.
Okay.
We've
purchased one?
We've utilized one through a TSA existing contract, and then we ran a pilot program that was under the FAA approved process, and that's the standard referred to as the 7460 FAA approval process that just ensures that things that we install in our airport are safe around aircraft.
Right. And so you're basically saying with that, then it comes as a pre-approved package for utilization because you got it through the agency or with the agency's blessing. So that's pretty, could I say, off the shelf? Any airport that can afford it could purchase it.
So I would say, in speaking with my peers, that yes, on the one hand, it's off the shelf, and I'll tell you the approval process was actually very, very quick. But I would say that across our community, I don't know that it's widely understood how relatively easy it is for systems that have been deemed to be safe in an airport environment. So do you think that airports just aren't aware that it's available, or is it an affordability issue? If you've got Dallas-Fort Worth is a pretty large airport, but there are a lot of smaller ones. So is it that they're unaware that they don't have the problem, or it's unaffordable, or a combination of all 3? I think it's a combination of many factors. You keep in mind that any system that you purchase and install, you then also have to operate. And most airports operate at least 16 hours a day. Even small ones operate 16 hours a day. Many, like mine, operate 24/7. Those systems do require, both from a detection perspective, you've got to have someone who can see the blip when it happens, and if we were to get into mitigation, you have to have people that can respond. So cost is an issue for airports, certainly, but it's always a balancing act. Again, for an airport like mine with 7 runways and 27 square miles in the center of the NAS, it's in our best interest to make sure that we can keep the airfield running.
How many
what's the personnel utilization for your system? How many folks are dedicated to working?
Right, so again, candidly, for an airport like DFW, we require no net new heads to do this work.
Okay.
Because we have a standing team that's constantly monitoring the operation. If I was in charge of a rural, small airport, I might have to add staff to be able to monitor that equipment 24/7.
Okay. Ms. Ellman, it's like Groundhog Day to me here. We've been at this for at least 10 years now, right? The FAA seems to, for whatever reason, blow through the deadlines over and over again. And I think it does hinder the drone industry in the United States of America with being competitive with foreign actors. Can you kind of describe how the FAA's reluctance or delays, lags affect the industry? And then something you said regarding Mr. Larson's questioning piqued my interest, where you said everybody should have access to the remote ID, or essentially, I'm just thinking about that. What if you have a large tract of ground, and I don't, but what if you do, and you privately want to fly your UAS to look at your cattle or enjoy flying your UAS, if that's something you do? Who else's business should that be? Why should anybody else care? And I mean, there are privacy concerns on both sides of this issue.
Absolutely. So I'll take your questions in order, Congressman. So first, with regard to delays on the rulemaking, it is a source of frustration for the community. There are a few rules that we've talked about today, Part 108, which would enable, scale beyond visual line of sight for commercial, compliant, authorized drone users. That would provide a normalized rule set. That would also help, because the more normalized and transparent rule set that we have here in the United States, the more people know what the rules are, and the more there's compliance, and the more people can identify outliers, right? So that's also important. The 2209 rulemaking has been outstanding since literally 2016. Congress mandated this rule. We're now almost a decade later.
Right.
We still don't have it. So, the FAA has actually done some good work getting the rules developed. They stalled in the interagency process during the last administration, and we would urge the Trump administration to really take these and run. We see this as a really great opportunity to, the Trump administration has a really great ground record of during the first term in terms of his drone agenda. There was good progress that was made, including around drone innovation and drone security, and we would hope to see that carried forward this term. We're happy to work with the administration on that. With regard to your second question around privacy issues, certainly that is a very good question, and that's one of the reasons why we appreciate your committee's legislation's focus where there are flight-restricted areas. So commercial drone operators know they shouldn't be flying there anyways. This is not about, we don't have a privacy right to fly in flight-restricted areas, such as near airports, for example, or at, crowded sports stadiums, which are covered by a temporary flight restriction, or at nuclear facilities. And so that there are privacy questions, but they're much mitigated mitigated in terms of flight-restricted areas.
Ms. Ellman, I'm going to ask you respond to the third question to Mr. Perry in writing. Time's expired. Ms. Davids from Kansas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you to you and the ranking member for holding this hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be here. First, I also want to just take a moment to acknowledge the tragedies. I know Mr. Perry also mentioned this, and so many of us have, both in Pennsylvania, and then, of course, the plane collision that occurred last week departing from my home state of Kansas. We have a pretty close-knit state, and tragedies like this hit every single Kansan. So my heart is breaking for the families and everybody who's been impacted across the country. The NTSB, you've already heard this, is conducting their investigation. I'm confident that our subcommittee is going to work together to take the necessary steps to prevent tragedies like that from happening again. As I hope folks know, the state of Kansas is also fortunate to have a very strong history of aviation. We're home to hundreds of airports of all sizes, I am personally positioned in the Kansas City area, so I get to fly in and out of MCI or KCI, depending on who you ask, where Chairman Graves represents. Of course, I'm biased. I feel like we've got the most awesome airport in the country. But one of the questions that's arisen in my time on this committee is the level of and various components of our national airspace and the coordination, the communication. We're hearing about that a lot today as well. And as it relates to the UAV environment and the diffuse proliferation of commercial and personal drones, that sort of communication and coordination is just becoming increasingly important. I do want to try to get us a little bit more context about how the federal partners are working with the stakeholders, and what more can be done to improve those channels of coordination and communication. And Mr. Perry kind of started to hit on this, but Mr. McLaughlin, I know that since 2017, DFW has partnered with the TSA on drone detection, and again, we heard some of the in the weeds about that, but I'm curious if you can help everyone understand the kind of larger context, the communication. You kind of mentioned the smoothness of the integration of the system, but can you talk a little bit about where we can improve that, and or what's going really well, so we can see if we can apply that to other things. I know we've heard, whether it's FAA, TSA, and the way you all work together.
Thank you for the question, and I've sort of talked about this a couple times today, and it maybe sounds simplistic, but it's such an important part of what we do in commercial aviation.
I always tell people, we're members of Congress, assume we know nothing, and help make sure that we don't miss the things that, as you say, might seem basic, but if we're in the weeds, we might miss that. So I would love to hear from you about that.
So local partnerships are really, really important, and we believe that if you practice well, you'll play well when it matters. So tabletops, full-scale exercises, doing the things together, TSA, FAA, airlines, airport, CBP, all of our partners working in conjunction. Every 3 years, the FAA mandates that every airport do what's called a triannual exercise, a full-scale exercise that simulates a real crash and a real response to that. So not entirely drone-related, but we just had ours last year. We had 26 different local agencies participate in that full-scale response. And that kind of work, that kind of relationship that's built year over year, decade over decade, is a critical factor in keeping the national airspace safe. Drones are a relatively new issue for us in commercial aviation, but attacking it together as a community is our best approach to keep us safe.
And I don't want to take up more time than I'm allotted here, but I'd love to continue the conversation and see whether or not, whether it's from the FAA perspective or TSA perspective, if there are barriers or things that might slow that process or ability to do that down because you're trying to work with the federal partners, if that makes sense.
Sure. As I said earlier, I think one of the biggest barriers that we could face in the event of a long attack, a persistent attack against an airport, the single biggest barrier is real-time authority for those agencies that have the authority to mitigate.
Okay.
Right now, they don't have that standing persistent authority,
Okay.
and that would be a change that would be really important.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Thank you all for being here. Ms. Ellman, I have a question about the legality of laws in place that we're allowed to knock these things down. I'm from Tennessee. I understand it's a 12-month season in Tennessee, and they taste a whole lot like chicken. So I was wondering what can be done about drones. Can we knock them down? Can you shoot them down if they're in your airspace, if you're in an area that allows gunfire?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. And the answer is no. First, there's all kinds of safety concerns when you're just shooting guns into the sky. There are other manned aircraft there, so there are safety concerns. which this committee would appreciate, but also it's illegal. A drone is considered an aircraft under the law, and so by shooting down a drone, you're shooting down an aircraft, which
Right, well,
is
what
against
are
the
the
law.
responsibilities if they're using them to spy on folks? You know, I've seen them flying over pools where I'm sure folks are frolicking and
Yeah.
probably not like to have their pictures taken.
Well, certainly technology-neutral privacy laws and rules would continue to apply. So if you're stalking someone with a drone, you're still stalking them, right? If you're intrusion upon seclusion, all of the various privacy laws and rules that you could think of would apply to the use of drones, just as it would apply to any other technology.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, can you tell more about the Dallas-Fort Worth International Detection System, and what is your procedure when you detect a drone operating inappropriately, and are these private citizens operating these unauthorized drones, or do you know of foreign entities operating around your airport?
So I didn't completely hear the last sentence of your question.
Are private citizens operating these unauthorized drones, or do you know of foreign entities operating around your airport?
So I'm not aware of any foreign entities operating around my airport. Again, we've seen a limited number of unauthorized drone uses in restricted space. When we see those drones, we first try to identify the location of the pilot. We'll send our law enforcement team to interview that pilot. If that location is outside of our jurisdiction but still inside our restricted space, we'll coordinate with other local departments to have that conversation with the individual. To an earlier question, in the state of Texas, knowingly operating a drone in an unauthorized airspace is a Class B misdemeanor in the state of Texas, so we can take local criminal action in those rare and unique circumstances.
That's after the fact, though. I mean, they're up there causing, you're just going to make a lot of discomfort for a lot of customers that are going to have to fly their planes elsewhere. You're not going to knock them down, correct?
Well, sir, I would say
How
that
would you
again,
know where they're from, even?
in the limited occasions where we have seen these 150 instances against thousands of appropriate instances, we find that a casual conversation with the pilot educates them and allows them to enjoy the drone they've purchased in a way that's safe, that doesn't impact the NAS, and doesn't impact their ability to use the tool that they've purchased.
President Trump informed us the drones were authorized by the Federal Aviation Administration for research and various other reasons. Did it benefit other parts of the government when Biden's Federal Aviation Administration acted in complete secrecy?
I don't believe I can answer that question.
Okay. Do you think Congress could ensure the agency responsible for managing these drones would be transparent with other government bodies about these sorts of risks in the future?
Yes, sir, thank you. I didn't understand the first question. Yeah, I absolutely believe that transparency is the best way for us to again, gain a common platform, a common understanding of what's happening.
Okay. It might be my accent. I'm from Tennessee. I'm the only person up here who does not speak with an accent, so.
I think it's my ear. I apologize.
It's all right. Dr. Cahill, do you have any concerns regarding counter-unmanned aircraft systems? And are these systems safer than others?
Congressman, I do have some concerns about some of the systems. They do need to be tested before they are implemented. Some of the early studies we've seen show that you can end up with cases where, for example, a radar may produce frequencies in lobes off to the side that could interfere with things they don't expect. So if you go through a rigorous testing process, and the FAA is working on setting that up and being able to standardize that, you should be able to determine which ones are safe to operate in which environments and move it forward.
A small drone recently collided with a crew airline performing a firefighting mission in California. Could the use of counter-drone technology possibly have prevented that? And what technology could a manned aircraft have on board if they do detect drone operations in their vicinity?
Congressman, in terms of the Super Scooper incident in California, that was a DJI Mini, I believe, that was, so it was under 250 grams, so it is not required to be registered. It was operating inside a TFR, a temporary flight restriction, so it was operating illegally. And so in terms of a counter drone, in that particular case, it could have been appropriate because nobody should be flying in a TFR, and you shouldn't have anybody on the ground in the wildfire that you don't know where they are. So in that case, it should have been safe, but the onboard detection of that small system, the aircraft would have no way of knowing that there was a drone in that location.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say for the record that with your presentation, I think it would behoove us to get a better grip on this. These rules and regulations are great until one of these things sucks into a jet aircraft engine and we lose precious lives. So I hope we get aggressive with these and have the ability to knock these things down. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this very important hearing along with the ranking member. I want to extend my gratitude to the witnesses today for appearing for your testimony. And the tragic events of the last few days have left communities in America and the aviation industry in mourning, and my heart goes out to the families and friends grappling with such unimaginable grief. We also owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to our first responders, the firefighters, paramedics, law enforcement, and other personnel who work tirelessly and diligently in this time of crisis, and I want to thank all involved in these efforts for their service. The idea of readily available complex task drones was once science fiction. Now, their reality presents a new challenge that demands we strengthen our ability to counteract their misuse. I'm not talking about mere nuisances. I'm talking about the potential for drones to be weaponized, used for surveillance, and deployed against our critical infrastructure. I wish this were not a reality, but we have seen in reports and heard the warnings. The threat is real. Americans deserve to know that these powerful technologies are being used responsibly and ethically. Now, just days ago, Elon Musk and Donald Trump issued their fork in the road memo to 2 million federal employees, including FAA employees, demanding that they either retire or look forward to being, perhaps reclassified or their jobs terminated. Now, given the specialized knowledge required for drone safety oversight, what challenges does the fork in the road memo pose to the FAA as it seeks to, first of all, retain current employees who are experienced and effective in the ongoing integration of drones into our airspace? And what challenges does it pose to attracting new talent to the FAA to work? And I'll ask you that question, Ms. Ellman.
Sure. Thank you so much, Congressman. I appreciate the question. Collaboration between the FAA and the drone industry is absolutely key. And it's something, it's actually, there's a lot of ongoing work done behind the scenes. Right now, just in order...
I'm talking in terms of the impact of the fork in the road memo. What impact does it have on the ability of the FAA to do its work?
Well, we certainly think it's critical that the FAA has the necessary staff resources to be...
So when you're actually offering money to experienced employees at the FAA and threats to them at the same time to leave your job, resign, does that hollow out those who are in position to help the FAA fulfill its mission and keep us safe?
I will just say, in my experience, the professionals I've worked with at the FAA are very professional. They have specialized expertise, as you say, and so
they are actually being terrorized right now, are they not?
I can't speak to their state of mind, but I do know that it's...
Wouldn't it terrorize you if you had to go to work facing the fact that you don't know whether or not you should resign, or whether or not you should stick it out hoping for the best. Whether or not you should take that 8 months of pay and leave the job, go get another job, make the money you were making on the old job plus the new job, forget all about the responsibilities that you were implementing on your old job. Just, it's better for you and your family to have some predictability about your future. Doesn't this memo impact those FAA employees adversely?
I can't speak particular to the memo, but
For you, if you were an FAA employee, wouldn't you be adversely impacted?
I can imagine that it would raise a lot of questions.
Yeah, and Dr. Cahill, what do you have to add on that?
And the people I work with in the FAA are professionals, and my concern with the fork in the road memo is that you may indiscriminately be taking out people who have long careers and expertise in an area and have it be disproportionately some of the people with the specialized expertise. The concern is, of course, how you would address it in such a way to maintain the level of expertise needed to deal with these issues. And to be honest, as an outside observer, I am a little concerned about what the impact may be on our work going forward if those people are no longer in those positions.
Thank you. And with that, I yield back.
Now recognize Mr. Owens for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for holding this very, very important meeting and hearing. We stand at a very pivotal moment. The decisions we make today have lasting consequences, not only for aviation, but every sector of our economy: transportation, agriculture, wildfire response, construction, rail, law enforcement, insurance, recreation, and retail. These and other industries are very much directly impacted by how this committee regulates UAS technology. The stakes couldn't be any higher. China is rapidly outpacing us in the drone industry, threatening both our economic leadership and national security. And as we pointed out today, we have some urgent challenges ahead of us, and our window is very narrow. This committee has responsibility to lead. The complexity of this issue is evident. Last year's Counter-UAS Authority, Security, Safety, and Reauthorization Act involved 3 committees which failed to become law, yet remain a top priority this year. I have full confidence in this committee to come up with a bipartisan solution and address the growth of this technology. Dr. Cahill, your testimony underscored the immense potential of UAS technology to enhance the quality of life in rural and isolated communities. However, you also highlighted the challenges posed by limited personnel and resources in these same communities to counteract nefarious UAS activities. How do you think this committee can strike the right balance between fostering innovation and ensuring national security?
Congressman, that's a very good question, because the potential value for these systems, especially in rural communities across the United States, is tremendous. And we're looking at going to larger aircraft. So our team has flown an autonomous Cessna Grand Caravan with partners. So we are not just talking small drones, we are talking a wide range. Of course, as you do that, it also means the potential risks of those technologies is higher. And we need to have a strong ability to understand what is there and what the potential impacts are and how to mitigate it in order to be able to use it effectively in a way we know. So in terms of that balance, it is always a risk-benefit calculation in terms of counter-drone. And so you have to weigh the benefits of what we actually are achieving, getting insulin to somebody who needs it in 3 minutes as opposed to, hours, versus the risk that that particular drone might be flying in a way that scares people, or if used adversely, could potentially impact another aircraft, deliver weapons, et cetera. So I think we need to work both sides. We can't just go for the sake of good, assuming that everybody's going to use it correctly. I think we need to have that strong counter-drone component to make sure that we are operating safely And I think HR 8610 was a good start. And we need to make sure that we are monitoring and moving forward those authorities as necessary to protect the airspace.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Ms. Ellman, you had a conversation with Mr. Perry earlier about the rules, elimination of certain rules. I want to add to that in terms of what we can do here. With the pace of innovation and acknowledging America is lagging behind other nations in this industry, what can this committee do to best craft legislation that is not obsolete by the time it becomes law?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question, Congressman. Thank you. So one of the important things when we're thinking about, obviously technology moves a whole lot more quickly than policy and bureaucracy. That's a timeless issue. It's certainly true in our industry and with drones. And we've talked about some antiquated laws and rules that also apply to drone technology, which mean that you can't actually deal with criminal drones. So as crafting this legislation, something that we do think is important is to be technology neutral and performance-based and risk-based, right? So enable, we've heard about, like from Chris, about this certain environment that airports present. There are other types of environments where there's no one-size-fits-all solution in terms of these technologies. There could be different technologies that are appropriate for different types of environment, and we want to not be prescriptive to the operator of these systems on what types of technologies they need to be using, and enable the end user of these technologies to themselves kind of determine what's appropriate in these particular circumstances, as long as they're not impacting the broader national airspace system and impacting safety in any way.
Thank you. It looks like I'm running out of time. I just want to say I'm looking forward to the innovation, and thank you guys for bringing that to us. We're in a different day, and I think it's going to be time to impact this industry in a very positive way. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm proud to represent Indianapolis, which is located in the great Hoosier State, home to the largest single sporting day event in the world, the Indy 500, also the Indianapolis Colts. Unauthorized drone operations have been a persistent problem, as you all know, that can interfere with sporting events at stadiums, especially at high-capacity stadiums. We included changes in the FAA reauthorization bill to address some of these concerns, but I do think we have much more work to do, and we can all agree on that. What have you heard from your stakeholders about problematic drone operations around major events, and are more changes needed for temporary flight restrictions for major events to strengthen safety and reduce possible disruptions?
I'm happy to speak to that. Obviously, you mentioned your local events in Indianapolis. That's true across the country. We have the Super Bowl coming up. Major sporting events have seen careless, clueless, criminal drone operations in increasing numbers over the last several years. And they also have historically been protected by this Congress post 9/11 with a NOTAM, notice to airmen, and flight restrictions, a TFR that starts 1 hour before and 1 hour after. So certainly, commercial drone operators know not to fly there. They know that they're not authorized. There are restrictions in place. This Congress also last year in the FAA reauthorization bill, there were additional steps taken to protect concerts, for example, with the large public gatherings provision. And so we think it makes sense, like your legislation would do, to protect stadiums, and we think there should be even larger numbers of stadiums protected under the legislation because it's not controversial. Commercial drone operators shouldn't be flying there. There's no privacy interests around these temporary flight restrictions, and we're talking about the safety of millions of Americans.
I yield back, Chairman.
I now recognize Mr. Weed from the great state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first, I'd like to thank the committee for holding this hearing today, and I'd like to say that I look forward to serving on this committee as we work to ensure that our nation's infrastructure is stronger, safer, and more efficient than ever before. I'd like to also thank all of our witnesses here today. Aviation is especially critical for my district, Wisconsin's 8th District, 2 international airports, dozens of small airstrips being right next door to the EAA, Experimental Aircraft Association. During that week-long AirVenture event in Oshkosh that makes Wisconsin the busiest in the world. It's become painfully clear that our aviation systems need to be re-examined and improved, with safety remaining our top priority. My deepest sympathies go out to the families of those who were lost last week in the terrible tragedy that occurred just miles from this very building. As we've heard today, unmanned aircraft systems present a wide range of uses across many different applications. However, we must ensure that their use does not compromise safety or security. I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee to identify and address those issues as they arise. We talked today, and thank you again for your testimony. We talked about detection and mitigation with drones. And I'll ask this to each of you. Are there certain areas right now where drones are not able to fly? And I don't mean that, they're restricted, where we say you can't fly. Are there like restrictive areas where they just literally can't? Like around here, those types of areas where like a drone just would stop and go the other way? Is there technology like that?
So it sounds like you might be asking about geofencing technology.
Geofencing.
Geofencing. So geofencing technology creates virtual boundaries for a drone. Certain drones do have that capability. I know manufacturers have been moving away from the use of geofencing technology. That actually makes your legislation even more important because it means that the careless and the clueless, who maybe previously couldn't actually get close to an airport because the geofencing technology, it was built into the virtual boundaries and they couldn't fly close to the airport, that no longer exists. So certainly, there is technology out there, but it's at this point not broadly used, except for commercial drone operators who install it for their use. And so there's even more need to protect from the careless and clueless.
Is there technology that we have that would literally not allow a drone to come near, like a building or an area? Do we have that technology? Is that available?
So we have technologies, Congressman, that if you come in the area, we can work on taking your aircraft down. But it is not a perimeter that operates independently. It would require human intervention, and right now it's illegal in most areas in the United States.
Do you feel that that is technology that we could ever have, that we could develop?
I do believe
is there
it
any anti-jamming, like for, I don't know, just an area that just doesn't allow drones to come through? I'm just wondering if that's a possibility.
So, Congressman, it is a possibility. The concern with jamming is that you jam other frequencies that were not intended, and so you could jam other systems that are operating on the same frequencies, or you could have emissions that aren't your primary emission but get emitted as overtones or other frequency bands that you don't expect and have adverse impacts. So that's the major concern with jamming, and in Alaska, the military does jamming exercises, and they have to notify every airman in the state that this is occurring to make sure that if they encounter something weird, that they're prepared and they can avoid those areas.
Okay, so it could be possible. It's just there's with every cause is a reaction. I mean, there could be other issues with using it around an airport or something like that. Okay, because it just seems to me that we want to prevent an issue with a drone flying into an airplane and obviously keeping us safe. So I'm just looking at other options for those that don't follow the rules, those types of situations. Do you feel that that airports are generally, Mr. McLaughlin, safe, including smaller airports from problems with unmanned aircraft?
Yes, sir. I continue to believe that the U.S. airspace, including the airports in it, is the safest system in the world, and we prove that every single day when we operate. As we've talked about, there are small UAS definitely can represent a hindrance to operations at airports, but we believe there's mechanisms to keep all airports safe, the small ones, the medium ones, the large ones. It may be a process solution in a really small airport and a tech solution in a really big airport, but we do think there are mechanisms that exist.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Foshee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cohen, for holding this hearing today, and thank you all for being here with us. Mr. McLaughlin, in your testimony, you write that the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport is one of the limited number of airports with detection systems in place. Can you share what lessons were learned and how they can be applied in an airport-specific approach to UAS detection and mitigation?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. I think we've had detection in place for about 7 years, eight years almost, if my math is right. And as I've said earlier, all detection has sort of strengths and weaknesses. One of the things that we learned early was that our system wasn't foolproof. It wasn't going to identify everything. But one of the important things that all detections do, systems do, is allow us to narrow the haystack. So if we can detect, if we can track, if we can identify drones, those that are authorized and those that aren't authorized, but we at least know who and what and where they are, that gives us a better opportunity to go after the ones that might be actually nefarious, the ones that we can't identify. We see them, but we don't know. So that, I think, has been one of the single biggest learnings that we've had. And then the second one, and I've talked about it a couple times, is that this constant, absolute need for real-time coordination with our federal, state, and local partners to ensure that we're on the same page, that we can communicate well, and that we can work as a team to mitigate situations as they arise.
And additionally, can you also comment on improving the role of the FAA or even the TSA in counter-UAS deployment at airports?
In terms of their actual deployment, for mitigation or detection?
For mitigation.
So we believe that for the federal government to better mitigate real-time incidents at an airport, it would be very beneficial for them to have a persistent authority, the ability approved once at the secretarial level, but then the ability to act when needed so that those actions could take place in minutes, not days.
Thank you. As a member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee as well, I am deeply interested in the safe and secure implementation of AI. Ms. Ellman, in your work with the Commercial Drone Alliance, can you speak to the extent AI is being utilized in drone or other UAS technology?
Certainly. So automation technology has been in the aviation space for many years. It's actually made air travel a lot safer, and that's a great thing. Drones as well are becoming increasingly automated. One thing that's really important here is this new Part 108 rule, which we've talked a little bit about, is expected to essentially put a framework around the safe use of these automated technologies, making that rule even more urgent to move forward as quickly as possible.
Are there other safeguards in place to prevent remote access from being an unauthorized operator?
Certainly, cyber protections are key, and there's lots of standards that are out there and work that has been done in the aviation space around cybersecurity that the drone industry can leverage, and we support as well stakeholders working hand in hand with the federal government around cybersecurity protections.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate all of you on the panel that are here today. A lot of information, and a lot of it honestly reveals more concerns, right? And the anxiety that we have about nefarious use, whether that is through negligence, whether that's through intentional disregard, purposeful misuse of unmanned systems. I mean, I think about the just massive uptake in drone use over the last decade or so. I think someday I'm going to tell my grandkids that we actually used to fly inside these things instead of outside of them. But that is just becoming more of a reality. I wanted to ask your thoughts, and I was not here in the last Congress when some of these things were considered and debated and voted on. But one of the biggest concerns I have is, you probably recall in 2019, there was a massive drone attack on a Saudi Arabian oil refinery where I think it was Houthi rebels launched this drone strike that they were unprepared for and unable to protect against, and it shut down one of the world's largest oil refineries for a significant period of time, presenting a major risk. Now, here in the United States, it was a newsworthy event, but it didn't really affect our daily life in a tremendous fashion. But that could have been different. It could have been happening here. It could have been happening in a more serious manner, in a national security threat, as the chairman had pointed out at the beginning of his remarks. You know, I know we've got a drone gun that can, you can shoot at a drone and it sets out a frequency that can guide it or misdirect it, what have you. That might work for one. What about when there are 5,000 and they all have a small payload? How do you prevent against that? I know that we don't have 5,000 nets we can fire up into the sky, for example. Are there ways that we are anticipating or preparing for that possible scenario, different than the 17-year-old high school kid that accidentally flies his drone through your airport, causing an economic disruption and time and lost energy and effort and all of that versus intentional national security threats?
Congressman, if I can take that question. Swarming is of great concern to everybody involved in the counter-UAS space. And we are looking at what types of technologies can handle multiple aircraft at the same time. There have been some videos released that people had in terms of what a swarm could do. They did it as a science fiction thing, but unfortunately, the reality is that some of these are very capable of happening. So the people involved are looking at all of the different kinetic opportunities. Some of those systems, when you start talking about some of the how to get into this, how some of the more high-tech areas, you can do multiple drones at the same time from the same system, and so we are testing those.
And those would be, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but just in the interest of time, those would not be precluded from operating or working if, for example, there was not a ground operator commanding all five, or the entire swarm, right? They were programmed before takeoff for that particular flight route, so they're not being controlled by a remote operator any longer. They've just been launched, and now they're going on the flight path.
Yes, so this would be
that.
working against an autonomous swarm.
Yeah.
And it is a concern, and I do know counter-drone manufacturers who are working in that technology.
Okay.
And Congressman, to your point, just wanted to highlight that the Section 2209 rule is exactly focused on this type of circumstance around oil and gas facilities and other critical national infrastructure.
Right. But rules aren't followed by people who
100%.
Have that in mind.
It's just another enforcement mechanism after the fact. Yes.
And I got to go quickly, too, so thank you for that. You mentioned, Ms. Ellman, technology-neutral vantage point rules and mechanisms. Mr. Burchett asked about, a family outside in their swimming pool, that type of thing. Would you agree with me that the technology isn't the same as if your neighbor buys an airplane or a helicopter and flies it in the national airspace and looks down at your pool from 1,000 feet up in the air versus having a drone that is 100 feet above you as you're enjoying an afternoon with your family or something like that? I view those two as separate instances. Now, being in plain view in the airspace is something that people can observe, but I feel like it's different when you are doing it in a purposeful way. In Michigan, in the state legislature, when I served there, we passed a bill that said if you are operating a drone and it does something illegal, it is basically the same laws would apply as if you were doing that versus if the drone was doing it. Is that a contemplation we can have? Would that solve some of these conflicts about individual concerns about privacy and everything else versus, the drone operator and operating in the national airspace and balancing those two?
Yes, certainly. So there are privacy or technology neutral laws and rules that do apply. If there are gaps, we would be happy to work with your office on that. I'm also from Michigan. I actually went to McIntyre Elementary School. I saw you grew up in Southfield as well. So
very good.
Be happy to work with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Holmes Norton for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would like to offer my deepest sympathies to the families and friends of the 67 people killed last week in the tragic mid-air collision near DCA. This collision illustrates why safety must be our top priority in managing the nation's airspace. The National Capital Region, part of which I represent, has the most restricted airspace in the nation, but the airspace near DCA is also among the most congested. Mr. McLaughlin, although the FAA prohibits flying drones within 15 miles radius of DC, which I represent, without authorization, what should the federal government be considering as it deploys counter-drone measures to protect the National Capital Region to ensure they do not interfere with safe operation of airplanes and helicopters here?
Thank you for the question. I mean, we will always say, and I'll say it repeatedly, safety always has to be our absolute number one priority. So for me, from an airport perspective, and especially in a congested airspace like we have in the NCR, it's critical that those traditional aircraft have a safe passage to their destination. And so things like rigorous testing in a variety of environments against multiple solutions and ensuring that there's always a buffer, a safety mechanism, if you will, to ensure that all systems are inherently safe. And if there's any question that they're not, they cannot be deployed in close proximity to airports.
Thank you. As co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus and the member who represents the District of Columbia right here, which is plagued by airplane noise and helicopter noise, I am interested in how drones can reduce aviation noise, such as by reducing the need for helicopters in certain circumstances. Ms. Ellman, how could increased use of drones reduce aviation noise?
It's a great question, Congresswoman. Thank you so much. And yes, it is accurate to say that drones generally are much quieter than larger manned aircraft. They're generally electric, battery powered, and not nearly as noisy as existing modes of transportation. So we see very many environmental benefits, including around noise, to integrating drones into our national airspace.
Thank you. Dr. Cahill, you mentioned the importance of communication with the public on drone activity. What steps can Congress take to ensure the public receives more information on drone and counter-drone activity?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. In terms of communication, I think Congress needs to really set the expectation for the federal agencies in terms of communicating with their stakeholders. It took a while before we got communications on the New Jersey drones, and people developed a whole bunch of good conspiracy theories in the process as they were taking time to evaluate what was happening. I think being clear early of what we know, what we don't know, what some of the limitations are, and setting that expectation of the agencies would be important towards developing trust with the public, and also, really highlighting what the good is of these systems, why we do the testing, and why there may be drones in the air, in addition to the fact that, if you happen to be looking at the operation in a particular area, why that might be worthwhile and important and not something necessarily that you would be broadcasting at all times, because there is often a security issue if you are operating over a military installation or some other facility.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Onder for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Mr. McLaughlin. So I'm a pilot myself, and I fly out of Spirit of St. Louis Airport in St. Louis. And one thing we learn when we're about 800 hours instrument rating, but one thing we learned very early is you don't go into Bravo airspace without permission. So the, 1,500 drone sightings, incidents, I forget what you call them.
150.
150. Yeah. Did they all enter your Bravo airspace?
The 150, and I'm going to say this generally, but I'm going to say yes. I'd have to confirm exactly that all 150 were in the Bravo airspace, but I think that is accurate.
Okay, because obviously, if I did that, entered the airspace without permission, I'd get call this phone number when you get down, copy this number down. I wonder I mean, generally, are you able to locate the drone operator, and do they face consequences? If so, what are those?
So generally speaking, we are able to, and by generally, I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but I would say more than 50% of the time, we're able to locate the pilot.
Because of the license plate signature that we talked about?
Yeah. And,
okay.
and as one of your colleagues mentioned, you know, a 17-year-old, that's generally who it is.
And that's generally what it
is.
is.
It's a kid in a local community who got a new toy and doesn't know the rules.
It's inadvertent, okay. And, you know, we do have laws against, you know, trespass. And, you know, one of my colleagues mentioned, you know, the pool, you know, your daughter is sunbathing out by the pool and someone flies the drone over and starts taking pictures. You know, let's say the dad walked outside and said, heck with this. And he's out let's say it's out in the country, there's no harm in shooting a 12 gauge in the air, and he blasts that thing. Did he just break some laws? I assume he did, yeah, I assume the answer to that's yes. Now, you know, of course, we're not allowed to guard our homes with shotgun traps, but what can that husband and father do when privacy is violated, or what laws is the drone operator, if any, violating?
Well, I would say the first step here is that we have this remote identification rule, which has now taken effect. Virtually all drones flying in the national airspace should be broadcasting a license plate.
Right.
And so I would, you know, tell that father to pull out their smartphone and pull up an app, drone scanner, for example, and point it at the drone and see what the license plate is.
Yeah.
And if it's then hovering over their pool, they call local law enforcement and say, hey, there's a drone hovering over my pool. Here's the license plate. Can you help with this?
Okay, and so that drone operator, though, might be violating laws against, you know, trespass or voyeurism or whatever, just like if he were doing it there himself. Okay, and then Dr. Cahill, you mentioned that the problem with counter drone systems might include laws such as Title 18 USC, the Aircraft Sabotage Act, and 49 USC aircraft privacy. I would imagine most of those laws were passed at a time where messing with aircraft, those aircraft were manned, and doing anything to mess with aircraft or aircraft communications or aircraft navigation systems would put people in jeopardy. But here we're talking about, you know, a drone. It's an inanimate object. Do you see ways in which we might need to change the law, or, you know, the FAA change regs in order to address that difference?
Yes, Congressman, I really do think that there should be some evaluation of that. Excuse me. Right now, if you take out an unmanned aircraft, you're looking at up to 20 years imprisonment and $200,000 in fines.
Taking out an aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
And the law doesn't really distinguish between manned and unmanned?
It does not. That in the statute in Title 49, Section 84001, the definition clearly states it is an aircraft. So right then and there with that wording, it is defined.
So yeah, 20 years, you know, taking out an aircraft, 20 years seems entirely appropriate. On the other hand, the example I gave to Mr. McLaughlin, the dad saying, who's this peeping Tom, you know, looking at my daughter and getting out the 12 gauge, that doesn't seem like he should go to prison for 20 years. So maybe there's a need for some distinctions in our law.
Congressman, I believe that there should be in there, but it needs to be reasonable, and you need to consider what the impact of an aircraft coming down is.
Sure.
You don't want somebody just shooting and having it fall on a car or a kid out playing.
Sure.
So there needs to be guidelines in there.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Gillen for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, the unauthorized use of drones is a huge issue in my district, which is right next door to JFK Airport, and it's one of the busiest airspaces in the world, with more than 60 million passengers a year. We'll always remember Flight TWA Flight 800, which tragically crashed off the coast of Long Island in 1996, killing all 230 passengers. The risk of a UAS incursion into our airport and across the path of a major airliner is unfortunately all too real. Are we doing everything we can to secure our airports and avert another potential disaster?
It's a great and really important question. Again, we're talking about safety, and we're talking about the safety of our traditional airspace as it relates to UAS. So in terms of what more can be done, for an airport like JFK, I strongly would encourage the use of technology that allows for the airport and the authority to detect, to track, and identify UAS in their airspace so that appropriate steps can be taken. I talked earlier about the idea of narrowing a haystack, the ability to see what's in your platform, what's around you in this common operating picture, gives you the ability to more quickly and more appropriately tackle the issues that truly are a threat to aviation, which are those ones that you haven't been able to detect, track, and identify.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question. As you mentioned in your testimony, Mr. McLaughlin, some state and local law enforcement agencies have advanced capabilities that enable them to respond to drone incidents near airports. What additional authority or resources can we give agencies like the Port Authority Police Department to help them identify and take down these unauthorized drones?
So we at DFW are proponents, and I would believe the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey might be as well, of pilots through agencies like yours and like mine, where we have very sophisticated police departments, where we have a high degree of training, and where we are subject to federal oversight, and where we have significant ability to invest in technology, safety-tested technology that can allow us to do our job effectively. We believe that locals, including airport law enforcement agencies, can serve as effective force multipliers for the federal government. We don't believe the federal government has the resources to be everywhere all the time, and we think that we can be, again, helpful in the fight against unauthorized UAS in our airspace.
Thank you. Dr. Cahill, as you know, the Department of Defense has established a joint counter-small UAS office and has issued a DoD strategy for countering unmanned systems. These systems can be used to counter the threat of killer drones used in the war against Ukraine, as well as drones used by Iran and Hamas. How can we also make use of this technology here in the United States to help protect our military bases, our critical infrastructure, and homeland?
So, Congresswoman, I completely and totally agree that this is a very, very important thing for our military to have these capabilities. Right now, we are learning in Ukraine as people are adapting unmanned aircraft in different ways, and people are working to counter them. We have trouble with having our local U.S. Counter-drone people actually test here. They're doing a lot of the tests and evaluation in Ukraine because it is a real use case, and they have trouble getting permissions here. The technology that is being developed in Ukraine needs to be applied to our military bases. In Alaska, we have a real challenge with people launching drones from the base of Eielson Air Force Base, which has 2 squadrons of F-35s. We have drone incursions at Fort Greely, which is our missile interceptors. We need to have this technology deployed at our military bases, and many of them do have some of the counter-drone technologies, but it needs to be improved, it needs to be strengthened. We need to be doing the research to make sure our military has the best systems possible.
Thank you. I yield back.
General Lady yields. I now recognize Mr. Shreve for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses being here. Just by way of background, I'm a new representative from central Indiana. My district includes the Indianapolis International Airport, where we have the second largest FedEx air hub in the country. So these issues are of central import. Before I came into this role, I served in city government, and the Indianapolis Airport Authority is a function of the city. It's one of our municipal corporations, and we own and operate 6 airports in the region. We have a nascent UAS system. My question is, probably best directed to Mr. McLaughlin. Would you point to, if not the DFW airport, any other airport authorities that, in your view, have the most evolved UAS system that an authority like Indianapolis or others could benchmark to aspirationally? Are there some that are ahead of the curve and have figured this out that we might follow their lead on?
Well, first of all, Indianapolis is a great airport. Mario does an incredible job leading that airport. And at the risk of arrogance, I would say that I think DFW has done some really good work over the last several years. We work closely with all of our airport partners. That's one of the reasons why I'm here today, is to advocate on behalf of all of our colleagues across the country. We also, work with associations like AAAE, ACI. The Core 30 airports come together on a regular basis to talk about issues and trends and opportunities. And so as a community, we're always willing to work together, and Indianapolis is an important part of that community, and we work with them all the time.
I appreciate that, and I would echo your sentiments on Mario Rodriguez. He's just been terrific for us in Indianapolis and regionally. Let me expand that question out just a bit further. I mean, the U.S. has the largest and most complicated air traffic control system in the world. I believe I'm correct in stating that. But are there nation states in Western Europe or in Asia, because of their relative compactness, that have better developed UAS systems that we might look to benchmark to as well, though we'd have to obviously amplify it materially given the much greater geography that we have across the continental U.S. and beyond?
Yes, so there are obviously other airports across the globe. Some of them are ahead of us in terms of doing actual work because they've had authorities to do that longer. So I don't know whether to name them or not, but I would tell you that we do a lot of information sharing with airports across the globe, and I'm aware of a couple that have pretty advanced processes in place, and would be happy to, again, talk to Mario about those in particular.
Well, please don't be shy. I mean, in terms of naming a few that we'd throw the spotlight on that we could, that those of us on this subcommittee could be attuned to and learn from.
So one person's opinion, and I will tell you that it's an ongoing relationship that we have with them on a couple of different fronts, and I'm not going to say, because I don't think I have the knowledge to specifically say they're the expert, but they've been very collaborative, is London Heathrow.
And is their structure, the BAA, something like the Indianapolis Airport Authority? London Heathrow covers the region that would include Gatwick and City Airport. Do they approach that UAS system across the London Metro, or specific to the airspace immediately around Heathrow?
So they're separate entities, and I really don't want to get too far over my skis in terms of describing what they can and can't do. Obviously, the Gatwick incident was an eye-opener for airports all over the world, and certainly Heathrow, being in close proximity, would have wanted to learn from that incident.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Garamendi for
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And for my colleagues, if I might interrupt for a moment, I've had the pleasure of sitting in this seat, the ranking member seat. So let me just comment very quickly. The Ukraine war is very, very important in this issue. Every day, the offense is countered by a defense, both by Russia and Ukraine. Very, very rapidly evolving counter-UAV technologies are underway, dealing with every issue that has been discussed here. So as we go through this process of trying to figure out what to do in the United States, I'd recommend that we would look to Ukraine and the lessons that are learned there. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Schulten for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Saw our senior member here, Mr. Collarhall, step in, and I wasn't sure if he was going in front of me. So thank you so much. We are I know my colleagues here have shared before, and I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity in this time to acknowledge the devastation of the crash over the Potomac, the victims and their families. Not only does this impact all of us on this aviation committee, but as members of Congress who fly twice a week to do the service of our country. This is so personal for so many of us, and I was struck anew about the importance of the work that we do on this committee, the work that you all do as well in keeping our airspace safe and secure for passengers, pilots, crew, and the like. So I trust, we know that the NTSB will thoughtfully investigate these tragedies and help Congress understand how we can continue to support aviation safety. Sightings of unmanned aircraft have been reported to the FAA at the 2 airports in my district. While I support the authorized use of drones to bolster aviation safety, I have heard increasing concerns about associated risks to airport infrastructure. Mr. McLaughlin, I understand from your written testimony that the FAA does not permit airports to access its data outlining whether or not a drone is authorized to fly near an airport. Can you speak to the importance of information sharing and how lack of FAA data may create barriers to an airport's detection efforts?
Thank you for the question. And to clarify my testimony, what I said or meant to say was there isn't an automated system for airports to have access to that. So again, I've talked about relationships and communication throughout this hearing. It's really important for airports and their FAA tower partners to be in regular and consistent communication. We have that luxury at DFW where we have a good information sharing with our towers and we know who's authorized and who isn't, but it's a very cumbersome, I'm not gonna say very, it is a cumbersome and manual process for us today.
Sticking with you, Mr. McLaughlin, I know DFW has benefited from partnering with the TSA to detect these UASs, as has GRR back home in West Michigan. Can you elaborate on how these pilot programs have equipped DFW in particular with additional tools to understand the UAS process? And how can Congress support the continuation of these collaborative efforts?
Yeah, thank you. So the long-standing work that we've done with TSA's system has, as I've said earlier, has shown us and given us the ability to narrow a haystack. What we know with that system is that there are also limitations with it. So we can't utterly rely on it to tell us definitively that there's nothing nefarious in our airspace. What we can do is use the information it does give us to tackle those problems, freeing up resources to be vigilant against the things that we're not aware of. So what do we need? We need to continue to develop technology that is more ubiquitous, that has the ability to see a greater range of potential threats across the spectrum so that we can narrow that haystack even further.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. In the wake of the tragedies, I was the tragedies of the crash, I was deeply disappointed to see culture wars make their way into the aviation industry. Very proud of the leadership on this committee for standing up and strongly pushing back against some of those accusations. I am so proud to acknowledge that our aviation workforce is filled with hardworking, highly skilled individuals who care deeply about safety, regardless of their gender or the color of their skin. This committee has long championed the continued growth and training of aviation professionals, including through our most recent FAA reauthorization. Ms. Ellman, can you touch on the need for federal training programs to ensure that all counter-UAS operators can appropriately utilize detection and mitigation technologies?
Absolutely, and thank you to a fellow Michigander. I appreciate the question. Absolutely, training is critical. We want to enable the use of counter-drone technologies, including mitigation technologies, including detection technologies, that to appropriately trained officials or even private sector entities. With regard to mitigation, that would only be law enforcement. We're not starting from scratch here. Obviously, the training curricula needs to include the understanding of the airspace as well as the understanding of the detection or mitigation technologies. But we have years of experience now under existing federal authorities as well as many test programs. So that's actually something that the federal government could start on today, is designing a training curricula to make sure that we hit the ground running when hopefully, fingers crossed, we see the legislation this year.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony and your time today. I yield back.
General Lady yields, and I'll recognize Mr. Van Drew for 5 minutes.
First of all, I want to congratulate the chairman. He's a friend, he's a good man, and he's going to be a great chairman, so I look forward to working with him. Just hearing some of this discussion with the drones, I just have to go back a tiny bit. I wasn't going to speak about this, but as some of you may know, I'm from Jersey. And boy, we were the epicenter of all this. And it was kind of interesting in the last administration, the Biden administration. First, we were told, and I remember this, we lived it, we don't know exactly what it is. We don't know where they're coming from, where they're going, what they're carrying, but we know there's nothing to worry about. So we went through that. Then secondly, we were told by the Pentagon and others, and remember, I've lived through this whole process, well, there's nothing really there, and it's basically just backyard drones, people looking at stars and looking at aircraft coming towards them, and they can look like drones. But then at the same time, military brought in specialized radar, as you know, to try to track them in the area because I guess they were concerned about frequency skipping and some other ways that drones can avoid detection. After that, we restricted our airspace. We had the FAA restrict some airspace, understandably so. We had sightings over a nuclear power plant, professional people, not backyard guys putting down a beer. We had air traffic controllers that came to me and had seen them. We had the Coast Guard that had discussed with this, and one of my colleagues from New Jersey as well, and said they had seen them. And so we restricted airspace. And we had the FBI investigate. And then finally now, what President Trump's been told, and I imagine they're going to dig into this a little bit more, is that he's been told what was the FAA all along, testing their own prototypes and other experiments. Then why did they restrict the airspace against their own prototypes? Why would they do that? And why didn't they say something to the FBI or the Department of Defense? Why do we bring the special radar out? It's like the FAA was a separate country that we were dealing with here. I just want to point that out. Hopefully, as we move along, we start to get a better handle on this because it's kind of crazy. And I want to say at the same time, I'm also just tired. I'm sick and tired of watching America fall behind in the last 4 years, behind in education, behind in the Coast Guard, behind in our roads, behind in our bridges, behind in our tunnels, and anybody will tell you that it's true. Behind in our AI. We're America, that's not what we do. We excel, we lead, we don't fall behind. And we've got to take this opportunity to work with President Trump and to work with our new chairman here to try to do something about a national drone infrastructure and protection system that makes sense. We've got to control our airspace, obviously, and we need the organizational structure to do that at the FAA. Ms. Ellman, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership on drone technology. I have the FAA Tech Center in my district and in New Jersey, and we have the Airspace Modernization Office and the William J. Hughes FAA Technical Center for Advanced Aerospace. Can they be utilized, and I know the answer to this, to advance drone infrastructure? Real quick.
Absolutely, and thank you, Congressman, for your leadership and for that question as well. Absolutely, the Tech Center is doing all kinds of really great work. I know they've been doing testing, I believe under the 383 program of counter-drone technology. They're doing testing of all different types of technologies. Certainly, the Tech Center is a great resource. We think testing is really important, just like the Counter-Drone Aviation Rulemaking Committee said, we need as much testing as possible. We've seen a good amount of it. We're going to see some moving forward as the authorized equipment list is determined. So absolutely, I think there's a critical role for the Tech Center and other research facilities to play.
Me too. You heard that one, Chairman, right? Okay. Secondly, and I know the answer, but just tell me real briefly, why are you so supportive of counter-drone systems?
Certainly. So I'm here representing the Commercial Drone Alliance. The commercial drone community recognizes that innovation and security are two sides of the same coin. We want to enable the good, all of the amazingly beneficial use cases, life-saving use cases that commercial drones can offer, but we also recognize that any technology, including drones, can be misused.
Exactly, and have. Congress directed the FAA to issue a rulemaking to establish no-fly zones around critical infrastructure and sensitive sites. We know that. The Biden administration failed to advance the critical rule, didn't go anywhere. How would a federal framework for no-fly zones over the private sector sites intersect with expanded authorities for counter-UAS? And are they important? I know they are, but go ahead, tell us.
Yes, no, they're very important. And Section 2209 has been languishing out there. This was a 2016 congressional mandate on the FAA. I know that the FAA has done work. There is a rule under development. It did not make it through the last administration. Our fingers are crossed we can get it over the finish line. These rulemakings, including 108 as well, are enabling rulemakings, which will enable this industry. So we want to see them move forward. We talk about limiting the legislation that you're considering to flight-restricted areas. Section 2209 would enable the limitation of drones over certain critical infrastructure facilities, such as oil and gas facilities or utilities or other sensitive airspace. And so they would really fit together hand in hand, where you have Section 2209 kind of says, okay, this is a sensitive airspace. We agree that unauthorized drone use should be limited in this area. And then that would kind of open the door for counter-drone technologies to be utilized in that airspace to protect it under your legislation.
And I appreciate that answer, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield back, but I'm just going to say this. We need to do better, and we're going to do better. I mean, we've fallen behind. We're not at where we should be. I want to understand, everybody understand that clearly. I've been deeply involved in this. I thank you for your answers, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carbajal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your post as chairman of this subcommittee. Look forward to working with you to find common ground when at all possible. Mr. Chairman, I also want to add my condolences to all those who lost loved ones and were impacted by the recent American Airlines collision and the medical jet crash in Philadelphia. These were tragic accidents and resulted in significant loss of life. I must also add how disappointed, to say the least, and how I found outrageous and despicable that our president would, instead of focusing on the tragedy, the victims, blamed the accident on Democrats, blamed it on DEI, worse than a 5-year-old child. And so again, but maybe I didn't expect more. With that, Dr. Cahill, in your written testimony, you discussed the risks of unintended consequences from state and local entities seeking to shoot down drones. However, we know that there are bad actors with access to drone technology that can do real harm to our nation's critical infrastructure. How can Congress strike the right balance between helping protect critical infrastructure and communities from nefarious drone threats and ensuring the safety of U.S. airspace?
Congressman, it's a good question. I think the balance really comes down to the communications. The federal government has the authority to get the information needed to help do a risk-benefit calculation. My concern is that someone on the ground who has the authority to use a mitigation system and hasn't been properly trained would take an aircraft down in a case where it could damage people and property underneath it, or it could have some other unintended consequence. So having the best possible information to make that decision and coordinating with the agencies that have those authorities, I think will be key. And it is a multi-stakeholder decision in terms of you're looking at privacy, security, airspace, all of those things together in terms of making that decision. So my concern is that if somebody is not appropriately trained, they're not going to go through all those levels of check to make sure that what they are doing is actually worth the risk.
Thank you. Ms. Ellman, the Commercial Drone Alliance has called on Congress to, quote, leverage other accountability mechanisms, unquote, to streamline interagency approval processes for expanded counter-UAS detection and mitigation technology use. Can you elaborate on this recommendation?
Certainly. So we appreciate that your legislation lays out an approval process for the use of drone or counter-drone technologies, for example, on the authorized equipment list, site analyses, and other types of approval processes, providing a framework in place for the use of this technology. And that makes good sense. I think what we want to prevent against is unnecessary red tape that doesn't involve safety or security, and we want to ensure that the program is able to move forward expeditiously without undue delay. And so the accountability mechanisms that we're referring to are essentially timelines in the legislation to ensure that these programs don't languish and are delayed.
Thank you. Ms. Ellman, to continue. As it has been in the news recently, many Americans have been reminded of the critical importance of maintaining safety within our nation's airspace, especially as we welcome new entrants and technologies within our airspace. The 2024 FAA reauthorization law, drafted by this committee, directs the agency to hire more individuals to fill key aviation safety roles. Why is it important to grow the FAA's technical expertise regarding drones in aviation safety positions?
Well, certainly, thank you for that question, Congressman. There are very hardworking folks at the FAA with very specific expertise, very professional expertise on drone technology. There's a lot of moving pieces right now and a lot of things that need the FAA's attention. Actually, to be able to fly commercial drones in any kind of expanded way beyond the very limited rules that we have on the books requires waivers, exemptions, or other approvals. That takes staff to approve. We need Part 108. That is a whole another staff that is needed to do the rulemaking. There's going to be industry standards that are necessary. So there's a lot of staff resources that are necessary. We agree, by the way, that and we want to see the processes very much streamlined, but we want to ensure that the agency is appropriately resourced so that we can make the progress that we need, so that the technology and the policy can catch up to the technology.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Titus for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you better hope that DOJ doesn't go after your staff that you need to advance this industry, or you won't have that staff that you need. I represent Las Vegas, Southern Nevada. It's a very busy airspace there. You've got McCarran, one of the biggest, busiest airports, and it's international. You got North Las Vegas, you got Henderson, got Nellis Air Force Base. You've got helicopter tours up and down the Strip and out to Grand Canyon. You've got general aviation, a lot of private planes coming in there for special events. And then you have drones. Some of them are used commercially, like for real estate development. Some are used by first responders for rescue. Some are just recreational. We even have some casinos that deliver drinks by the pool with drones. So, I mean, the use is endless. In addition to that, though, Nevada is one of the 7 states that has the testing center. You mentioned Alaska. And I was pleased to get in the FAA reauthorization bill a continuation of those through FY 28. Doctor, would you talk about what's happening in those centers, if anything is going on with the counter-drone studying and the use of counter-drone technology and how they really do help to develop the industry?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for that question. Yes, we are grateful that you guys extended the FAA test sites, and we are working in counter-drone technologies. Multiple of the test sites are working with federal partners to be able to test the safety and security of counter-drone systems, whether they be mitigation or detect, track, identify. There are projects through the FAA Center of Excellence, through IDIQ contracts that allow the test sites to work these operations with a federal authority who has the ability to mitigate. The test sites are a great place to do this testing because we have long track records of safety. We also are predominantly working in areas where we have minimal ground hazard. So being able to test those technologies in an area where if something goes awry or if it goes correctly and you drop the drone in a place, you know that you're not going to have an adverse impact. So the test sites have all taken advantage of this. You granted us the permission to buy covered systems to be able to test drones from foreign adversaries and others so that we can make sure the counter-drone systems work. And I know that all of the test sites are looking forward to doing more on this front. We would like to have the direct permissions, of course, to press the button, but we do not. So overall, the test sites, I think, are going to be an important component of doing that testing in a known, safe area with FAA involvement.
Well, if you give us some advice on how we might extend their authority, that would be helpful, since they're going to be in existence longer. We want to be sure they're doing what they need to do. I know that in Nevada, they work with other stakeholders like DRI and the University of Nevada. Is that a kind of a common practice with these test centers?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you over
Oh,
this.
I'm sorry. I said in Nevada, they work with the UNLV, the university system, Desert Research Institute. Other stakeholders are engaged with the test centers. I suspect that's a common practice. I don't know about Alaska.
That is a very common practice, Congressman. The test sites are all working with various universities, with public agencies. We all work with commercial providers to be able to do this testing. And we were designed to be able to test for safety in the airspace, and that is for all comers. And we now have the ability to do civilian operations in addition to the public operations we have been doing for years. So it is possible to get the authority to fly up to a 1,320-pound aircraft as a civil aircraft now for developing hours on that platform to get it to commercialization. So this has been a major advantage for the community in terms of moving forward.
Right. Just briefly, Ms. Ellman, you mentioned about using drones for firefighting. This is so important in the West. We saw it in California. Would you just re-emphasize that point of how helpful they can be?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, rogue drones shouldn't be interfering with wildfires, but drones have a really important role to play, as Congress recognized in the FAA reauthorization, including by encouraging the study with an interagency around how drones can actually help combat wildfires, but also prevent wildfires in the first place. And I'd be happy to work more with you on that.
The gentlelady yields. Thank you, Ms. Titus. I think we have a couple members that are on their way. There's other committees. I'm going to provide them a little bit of grace. But Ms. Ellman, you've used the words a couple of times, careless and I think confused. Some of these drone pilots that are just by mistake, I guess they happen to run a drone into a restricted airspace, and because they were careless and confused. I think you used both those words. See, I'm concerned more about the evil and the bad actors. What about those individuals? And just on a simple yes and no question for all three of you, are the 450 plus commercial airports that we have equipped today to deal with mitigation should a bad actor intend to fly a drone into our restricted airspace at an airport? Yes or no, Ms. Cahill? Dr. Cahill?
Sorry, I had trouble hearing that question.
Okay, are we prepared today, should a bad actor fly a drone into our restricted airspace as it relates to mitigation at the 450 plus airports? Just a simple yes or no. Are we prepared, Ms. Hill?
No.
No. Thank you. Well, you want to have a casual conversation? I'm sitting here waiting for this. But no, I tell you what I have heard, this is our first hearing, and I think this is very important. I think the American people demand the best. I think we have the safest aviation record in history. I mean, things are going very, very well, but we just make sure that we keep our eye, on the prize and everything, make sure that we don't have any more issues and accidents like we had the other day here in DC and then in Pennsylvania. And the individuals I've talked to on this committee have really appreciated what we're trying to do here. I think it's all about education, and I think that we have to listen to the industry as well. One thing I've learned about Congress up here is we think we know everything, and we don't. We don't. We need to look to industry leaders and stakeholders and experts on what's happening out there, and then take that information, digest it, and then come up with some reasonable options or recommendations to improve our system, to make sure that we are, I mentioned the other day, I said we are the gold standard. We are the gold standard in aviation, and I think the globe is looking for us to continue to maintain a standard, that high standard. All right, Ms. Poe, you ready? I recognize you for 5 minutes.
so sorry. Here you go. Very well. Thank you again. Thank you, Chairman Nels and Ranking Member Cohen, for holding this hearing. First, I'd like to acknowledge the horrific crash here in Washington last week. I want to express my deepest condolences to the loved ones of all the victims of the crash, and I want to thank all of the first responders who worked in extremely challenging conditions to try to help and then find the victims. I look forward to reviewing the NTSB reports when it is issued, and I won't speculate on that cause. I am confident policies for diverse workforce were not the reason for the first major commercial crash in 16 years. I plan to work with this committee to ensure that we have enough well-trained, qualified air traffic controllers serving America, and to address the root causes of this crash and to prevent future tragedies. Let me just begin by saying that many Garden Staters were mesmerized and worried by all the reports of the mysterious drones in the sky late last year, certainly in New Jersey. So I'd like to ask Dr. Cahill, if you would. I would appreciate I appreciate your testimony on the fear that New Jersey experienced and the ensuing confusion. Do you have any recommendations for whether federal, state, or local entities should be primarily responsible for addressing invasive drones? And how do you believe can we improve coordination among these entities?
So, Congressman, I think it's very important that we have communication and that it is clear and obvious. A lot of people in the community don't know about the remote ID rule that Ms. Ellman has talked about in terms of those electronic license plates. That needs to be communicated better. We need to communicate between the different agencies. And I'll be honest, in terms of New Jersey, people don't realize how much drone testing is occurring. The William Hughes Test Center is testing. And I'll admit, we have operators flying under the University of Alaska Fairbanks at Cape May. So, there is a lot of activity that people don't know that is designed in terms of test and evaluation and is publicly FAA approved. But there isn't a list normally that is kept in terms of who happens to be operating under which permission when. And so that was one of the challenges in terms of the FAA didn't know who was necessarily in that airspace at that moment. Because we can get permission to fly at a specific area, and for us, we have to do a notice to air mission to say, yes, we are flying, 24 hours in advance, but when exactly you happen to be in the airspace and whether or not people pay attention to that is very different.
So just to point out, it was I know from in terms of our state and in terms of our community, many of my constituents were extremely concerned, very fearful, had absolutely no idea what was going on. So it is that kind of information or lack thereof, right, or knowledge that created that. So I'd like to very quickly, before my time runs up, I wanted to just make mention, and I'd like to point out that, just earlier this week, I had the opportunity to travel to New Orleans to learn from law enforcement about the threats of our nation's, what a threat to our nation faces around the highly attended big events. This is a priority for me as my district will be hosting the final game of the World Cup next year. And we were there in New Orleans for the Super Bowl and overseeing that. Ms. Ellman, if you would please, how can Congress address that large public event like the World Cup or Super Bowl to make sure that it are safe from drones operators operating from some of these really bad actors? What is your opinion? I know we have a very short time here.
Certainly, I'll talk fast. Thank you for the question. So Congress has recognized the sensitive airspace around stadiums for years, right, with post 9/11 with the temporary flight restriction. Clearly, Commercial drone operators know not to be flying there without permission. There's no right to fly in restricted airspace. We need the ability for states and localities that are properly trained to utilize not just advanced detection technology, but when necessary, mitigation technology in those areas at those events.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Baggage for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've talked today about the fact that that drones represent an asymmetric capability. They're low cost, they're off the shelf, and there are low technical barriers to utilizing these technologies in nefarious ways. So that is a backdrop, and I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Cahill. Where do you believe the authority for counter-UAS activity should reside? It's a multi-layered threat to public safety, national defense, and critical infrastructure. Where do you think this needs to be centralized? Where should that reside?
Congressman, first off, thank you for being here for Alaska. Secondly, I really think that it should be at the federal level in terms of that coordination, communication, and information being available. Anytime we are making a decision to take a drone out of the airspace, there's always the potential for an accident or unintended consequences. And I think that the people who are best equipped to do that cost-benefit analysis are at the federal level where they can ensure the security, privacy, et cetera. As we've had the discussions today with the members of the panel, places like airports where you can sterilize the airspace and you have control of the ground have some different requirements than in the general population. So I'm far more comfortable with people at that type of level and working with TSA or the federal agencies to do the counter-drone.
Are you aware of any specific technologies that are available to the Department of Defense that are not currently available for counter-UAS that should be available to civilian jurisdictions?
The answer to that is yes, but I really can't get into details here.
So do you believe that some of that technology, without getting into the details, should be made available to civilian authorities in order to better address UAS issues?
Congressman, I do. It needs to be carefully done because a lot of these do have national security implications. If the specifications get out, especially if it's located to a location, you get into classified region very, very quickly when you're dealing with some of these military capabilities.
Thank you. In your estimation, what specific steps does the FAA need to take to give Akwasi the authority to work on developing best practices and protocols to address UAS threats?
So, Congressman, in terms of us being able to do it, there was a good first step with the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. You gave us permission to purchase covered drones. You said that we can support counter-drone testing, but we don't actually have the authority to press the button. So having somebody from the FAA who is embedded with us or works very closely with us who has the authority to do it, or a delegation of the authority to the test sites from the FAA would be very helpful for doing that testing. Because right now, a lot of the commercial operators here in the US are very limited on where they can test. And you want them testing at the test sites. You want them testing in areas with minimal ground hazard. And you want to make sure that the US commercial entities don't have to try to wait for an opportunity to work on a military range. You want them to be able to develop it very quickly and have it do the basic testing at a lower level than that particular activity.
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership in this issue. I expect that it will continue for years to come, and it's very important that Alaska remain in a leadership position on this research and the development of these protocols. I thank you for your testimony here today, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Any further questions from any members on the subcommittee that have not been recognized? I will say this, almost 3 hours, just about everybody was here, so that's very, very good news. Everybody was here. Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. Again, thank you all for being here. This subcommittee stands adjourned.